Chapter 325. On the other side, Li Zheng and Xiao Yunlong separated. In addition to informing the 300 people given by Wu Qingyue, Xiao Yunlong also went to inform Chen Yuding's deputy captain. He asked someone to bring the team members to the square. It didn't take long for Li Zheng to return to the square and saw that Lei Yao was the first to come back. Lei Yao saw him and said, "Chen Yuding is not at home. I heard from his neighbors that he didn't come back last night. It seems that his wife is missing." Li Zheng listened and thought of Chen Yuding's expression when he saw him at Wu Qingyue's house. He nodded and said, "That's right. I saw him at Leader Wu's place. He was really in a bad mood." Lei Yao said, "Is he still going with us?" Li Zheng shook his head and then walked to Lin Xiao and Lin Feng. Wu Qingyue's team will bring his 300 people here before 2 o'clock. Also, he asked you to go to his house first. He seems to want to ask you for help. He said that you can set the conditions. Lin Xiao looked at him doubtfully and said, "From what you two just said, Chen Yuding couldn't find anyone last night and then went to Wu Qingyue to ask for help this morning. But why did Wu Qingyue ask me to help?" Li Zheng also shook his head and said, "I don't know. He just said that he wants to see what conditions you need." Lin Xiao thought for a moment. Did that man know her identity as a zombie? He wanted her to help him find someone? But she didn't seem to take off her glasses in front of him. How did he know? Thinking of this, she denied the idea. If he really knew her identity, wouldn't he drive her out of the base? Wasn't he afraid that she would go crazy in the base? And why did he ask her to go there? To find someone? Did he think she was a police dog? She rolled her eyes and looked at the time. It was only 9 o'clock, not 10 o'clock. There were still 4 hours before the departure time, so she could go and see the situation. If that was the case, he only needed to give her 100 people. Then she would help. "Okay, I'll go," Lin Xiao said to Li Zheng. Then she said to Lin Feng and went in the direction of Wu Qingyue's house. In Zone F, Shen Yuzhen, the woman who was captured and locked up in a room by Pu Shuokang's men, was Chen Yuding's wife. But at this time, she was no longer the same as she was yesterday. At this time, she was lying on the bed like a broken doll. The clothes on his body had been torn to shreds, and only pieces of cloth were left hanging on his body. His originally fair body was covered in bruises, and his lower body was a mess of bloodstains. Her face was also sad, and her eyes were half closed, staring blankly at the ceiling. Since Pu Ziakang had humiliated her yesterday, the other men had come in one after another. She didn't even know how many people had come in and gone out. How many times had she been fucked since yesterday afternoon? And he didn't stop for the whole night. In the dark night, there was nothing scarier than a man who couldn't see clearly on top of her. In the morning, her consciousness was already fuzzy. His breathing also weakened. Several men outside the door said with some regret at this time, "We're too cruel. This woman probably won't live for more than a few hours. It's all your fault. I told you to restrain yourselves. You still need to use it in the future. But you all act as if you have never touched a woman in your life. Tell me, how many times have you been in there? 3 times, 4 times, 2 times, 2 times. You see? Don't you think that this woman is an ordinary person? Can her delicate body allow you to play with her like this? Well, she's dead. Now think about how to deal with the body. Can't we just throw it out of the base secretly? How? There are people guarding the walls. If we go up, we will definitely be discovered." The men discussed how to deal with Shen Yuzhen inside, even though she was not completely dead yet. Although she was not completely dead, they already regarded her as a dead person. "Wait, I have an idea. Doesn't the Research Institute need zombies? We can turn this woman into a zombie and then send it over." Suddenly, a man's mind flashed, and then his eyes lit up. The others looked at him in confusion and asked inexplicably, "Turn her into a zombie? How? Where do we go to find the zombie virus first?" The man who came up with the idea smiled slyly and said, "Don't worry about this. I can get the virus now. You just ruin her face and don't let people recognize her original appearance. Wait for me to come back." After saying that, he hurriedly turned around and left, leaving the others looking at each other in the same place. What a pity. We haven't had enough of this woman. Yes, but she's too weak. Hey, she's gonna die anyway. Why don't we go in again while she's still alive? There won't be another chance like this if we miss this opportunity. I don't know when we will encounter such a wonderful thing again. Hey, that's a good idea. Let's go in. Then, they immediately turned around and entered the dark room. Then, they took turns to humiliate the motionless woman on the bed. On the other side, Chen Yuding had been restlessly waiting for Li Zheng's news with Wu Qingyue. After waiting for about half an hour, Xiao Liqing ran in and said, "Leader Miss Lu is here." Wu Qingyue and Wu Yueling were watching her eat in the dining room. Hearing Xiao Liqing's report, they immediately nodded and said, "Let her in." On the other side, Chen Yuding immediately stood up from the sofa. Xiao Liqing turned around and left, and not long after, Lin Xiao walked in. "Tell me, what do you need my help with?" Her hoarse voice rang out. Wu Qingyue raised his head and looked at her. Before he could say anything, Wu Yueling, who was in front of him, suddenly threw her fork into the bowl. Then she slid down from the chair and ran happily towards Lin Xiao in her little slippers. "Hey, you haven't finished your breakfast yet." Wu Qingyue stared blankly at his own daughter, happily running towards the zombie. Just as he finished speaking, he saw a gray shadow flash on the ground and jump towards Lin Xiao. This was a real jump, and it was a very high jump. Lin Xiao saw Xiao Budian running towards him so happily and smiled as he bent over and picked her up. "Are you full?" While speaking, he walked over to the sofa and sat down. "Tell me, what are you looking for me for? If it's a deal, I only need manpower." Chen Yuding immediately said to her, "Miss Lu, can you help me find my wife?" Lin Xiao looked at him, nodded and said, "I already know about your wife. If you're looking for me just to find your wife, then give me another 50 people. Then give me another 50 people if you can find them and bring them back. Add another 50. Chapter 326. Wu Qingyue and Mengyu looked at Wu Yueling and the rabbit that jumped to Lin Xiao's side. They couldn't help but look at her strangely. Wasn't she a zombie? Why did small animals and children want to be close to her? Or did she have something on her body? Wu Qingyue had always been concerned about the fact that Lin Xiao had stolen his daughter's heart. "Only 50 people? I thought you would have other conditions." He walked over and sat down on the sofa. Lin Xiao put Wu Yueling on her lap and turned to look at him. "You should know that what we need the most right now is manpower. We don't lack anything else." Wu Qingyue nodded. "Yes, that's true." Lin Xiao said, "Tell me, you want me to take you to find the person? Or should I bring the person back to you? 50 for the former and 100 for the latter." Wu Qingyue looked at Chen Yuding's impatient face and said, "You can take us there directly. If it's manpower, I can give it to you. We can also take 10% less of your labor remuneration. How about it?" Lin Xiao nodded. "Okay." Then she turned to Chen Yuding and said, "Your wife is missing. Do you have anything on her? I want to confirm her smell." Chen Yuding looked at Wu Qingyue with some surprise, but he saw a faint smile on his face. Then he immediately took out a broken bracelet from his pocket and handed it to Lin Xiao. "This is Xiao Zhen's bracelet, but it fell in the place where she went missing yesterday." Lin Xiao took it and sniffed it before giving it to him. "I got it." She carried Wu Yueling to the sofa and said, "Little one, sit here for a while. I'll be back soon." As she spoke, she picked up the gray furry ball that had jumped onto the sofa and placed it in her arms. Wu Yueling held the gray furry ball and looked at Lin Xiao and nodded obediently. Lin Xiao stood up and walked toward the door. Wu Qingyue and Chen Yuding also stood up and followed her out. Chen Yuding followed Lin Xiao closely. As a result, when he came out, he saw Lin Xiao suddenly bend his legs and jump to the top of Wu Qingyue's 3-story building. Then, he jumped from the top of the building to the top of a telephone pole next to him. Then Lin Xiao quietly stood on top of the telephone pole, looking left and right. After Wu Qingyue came out, he said to Xiao Liqing, "Gather 30 people and prepare for action." Xiao Liqing immediately nodded, then turned around and left quickly. Wu Qingyue walked to Chen Yuding's side and looked up at Lin Xiao with him. Then, Lin Xiao jumped down again. He gently landed in front of them. "The direction is that way. I have to remind you to move faster." "Because?" Lin Xiao pointed in the direction of Area F. Then, he paused and looked at Chen Yuding. "Her breath is very weak. If we go any later, we might not be able to make it. Chen Yuding's expression changed, and his eyes widened slightly. Wu Qingyue's face darkened. He turned around and walked out. Let's go. Behind him, Xiao Liqing quickly drove an off-road vehicle out. Lin Xiao got into the passenger seat. Then she pointed in the direction of Area F and said, "It's over there. The smell is very mixed." Xiao Liqing looked at her and asked uncertainly, "Is it Area F?" At this time, Wu Qingyue sat in the back seat and said, "It's Area F, hurry up." "Yes." Xiao Liqing immediately started the car and drove out. Lin Xiao, who was in the front, looked back at Wu Qingyue. She saw that the man was smiling, and she couldn't tell what he was thinking. As long as it was his little princess, he would have an unpredictable smile on his face. "You can understand me," Wu Qingyue said with a smile. "I'm just guessing, because we can guess the direction you are pointing in." Lin Xiao said, "Then why are you so sure?" Wu Qingyue didn't answer. He just stared at her sunglasses with a smile. Lin Xiao looked at him inexplicably and then ignored him. She couldn't understand the man's eyes at this time. At this time, Wu Qingyue suddenly said, "You cut your hair so short. Is it because I hit you with lightning?" Lin Xiao instantly turned back and stared at him closely under the sunglasses. Wu Qingyue only felt that he was locked by her eyes, and an invisible aura spread in the car. Chen Yuding and Xiao Liqing, who was driving, suddenly felt that the car was suffocating. Only Wu Qingyue smiled as if nothing had happened. "Hey, why are you nervous? Is it because I recognized you?" Lin Xiao looked at the other two people and then turned back to the front. "Do you think I'm nervous? That's just my natural reaction." As she said that, she suddenly stuck her head out of the window and sniffed ahead. Then she shrank back and said to Xiao Liqing, "Hurry up, turn left 500 meters ahead." After more than 10 minutes, Lin Xiao and the others arrived at the refugee area in Area F. At this time, in the dark room upstairs in Area F, Shen Yuzhen's chest was already very light, almost as if it was not moving at all. There was a man lying on top of her, and he kept moving. Several men were squatting and leaning against the corner of the wall, discussing in surprise. "Hey, she's hanging on for so long in her last breath. This woman must not want to die. Lao San, be more aggressive. If you can't kill her, don't come down. Ha ha ha. Yes, you said she gave you her last breath. Look, you've been doing it for half an hour. She's not dead yet." Hearing what they said, the other person next to them said, "All right, don't really kill him. First inject the zombie blood, and then let her slowly die." The man lying on Shen Yuzhen's body suddenly moved intensely, and then suddenly stopped. Then he lay still on Shen Yuzhen's body for a while, and then he got up and pulled up his pants. Unfortunately, there's no reaction," the man said while fastening his pants. The man who said to keep her alive then walked to the bed. In the dark room, the syringe in his hand flashed. The syringe was half filled with dark red blood. He didn't know where this man got the zombie blood from. He bent down and pulled up Shen Yuzhen's bruised arm, and then inserted the syringe into it. Then he pushed the vial of blood that carried the zombie virus into it. The injection of blood didn't make Shen Yuzhen, who was already like a corpse, have any reaction. After the man took out the syringe, he said to the others, "Bring the bag." They were going to inject this woman with the virus blood and then secretly take her to the research institute while she was sick. Because the virus didn't spread that fast in a living person's body, there was still some time for them to take the woman to another place. At this time, there was a loud noise. Bang! The door of the room was suddenly kicked open. Chapter 327. Bang! The door was kicked open with great force. Then a hoarse voice came from outside the door. "You'd better not move, or I'll cut off your feet." "Who is it?" The people inside were all shocked, jumping in fright. He shouted towards the outside with a face full of shock. Then they saw a strange person wearing a hat appear outside the door. Because of the hoarse voice, the people inside couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman. Now that the person appeared, he was standing in a place with his back to the light. They could only see his silhouette, but not the tall chest in front of him. Seeing the person come in, they immediately knew that the other party didn't have good intentions. So they directly ignored Lin Xiao's words. They all moved, preparing to use their special abilities. Lin Xiao suddenly opened his claws and swung. Puff, puff, puff. Ah, ah. After a few sounds of flesh being cut, there were shrill screams that spread far away. Then, these people fell to the ground. Ah, my feet, my feet. Ah. Lin Xiao walked in slowly. There was an indescribable smell mixed with the strong smell of blood in the room. Because the door was wide open, the light in the room immediately became several times brighter. Everything could be seen clearly. At this time, there was a rush of footsteps outside, and then Qin Yuding was the first to come over. Xiao Zhen, little. But when he ran to the door and looked in again, he saw that the door was empty. Suddenly, his voice was choked in his throat, and he couldn't make a sound. He widened his eyes and looked at Shun Yuzhen, who was lying on the bed without a trace of life. At this time, Wu Qingyue came over with his men and saw the scene in the room. After seeing the scene in the room, the smile on his face faded, and he walked in expressionlessly. Qin Yuding walked step by step toward Qin Yuzhen on the bed in a daze. Wu Qingyue's expression was solemn as he followed behind him. She still has a breath. Lin Xiao's voice came. She walked to the bed, reached out, and touched Qin Yuzhen on the bed, and then said, "But she seems to be waiting to see you for the last time." Her words were like a bolt of lightning, striking Qin Yuding's mind. He lost all ability to react. As for those men who had their legs chopped off by Lin Xiao, they were lying on the ground and about to faint. Xiao Liqing took the initiative to bring people in and tied up the man. Then he was dragged out. Lin Xiao took off his coat and covered Qin Yuzhen's bruised body. She waved her hand, and a glass of clear water appeared in her hand. As soon as Wu Qingyue saw her water, his eyes lit up. Then he stared at her closely. "This water came from you? Or did you get it from Yuan Tianxing?" Lin Xiao pried open Qin Yuzhen's mouth and poured the water into her mouth. Hearing Wu Qingyue's words, he just replied faintly, "Why don't you guess?" Wu Qingyue watched her put away the empty cup, then looked at Qin Yuzhen. He then turned his head to look at Lin Xiao, who was not wearing a jacket. He was wearing a military vest inside. Her white arms and slender waist appeared before his eyes. The last time he saw her in the Westlake district, she was dressed like this. She was wearing a loose camouflage uniform, which seemed to be for men. In addition, she was not short, so she really looked like a man after cutting her hair and wearing a hat. But as soon as the jacket was taken off, her hot figure was revealed. Lin Xiao looked at Qin Yuzhen, her hands hugging her chest. She squeezed her chest, revealing the cleavage in front of her. She raised a hand and scratched her chin with her fingers. Just now, she did not say that this woman was infected with the virus because she did not use water to test whether the virus could be removed from an infected person. She only knew that the virus in zombies' bodies could be suppressed. So she wanted to give this woman a glass of water before Qin Yuding and Wu Qingyue knew the situation. Anyway, after drinking this water, it would be enough for her to hang on for a little longer. She felt Wu Qingyue's gaze on her body, so she looked down and glanced at her white chest. Fortunately, she found a suitable bra to wear a few days ago. Otherwise, she really did not dare to take off her coat. If it were not for the two men looking at the naked body in the room without any self-awareness, she would not have taken off her coat. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and decided to divert his gaze. "Can I ask you a question?" Wu Qingyue looked up at her. "Ask me." Lin Xiao nodded. Wu Qingyue looked at Qin Yuding, who was holding Qin Yuzhen at this time, and said, "Can you save the question for later? She still needs help." Lin Xiao was stunned and asked, "Can she be saved like this?" She did not know who else had the ability to save Qin Yuzhen in this state except for her lake water. Wu Qingyue said, "There is one person who may be able to." Then he said to Qin Yuding, "Let's go. Go back and find Dr. Liang." Qin Yuding picked up Qin Yuzhen's body and then followed Wu Qingyue out. Lin Xiao was also interested in this Dr. Liang he mentioned, so she silently followed him out. She took Qin Yuzhen back to Qin Yuding's home quickly. Qin Yuding carefully put Qin Yuzhen on the bed and covered her with the quilt before returning the clothes to Lin Xiao. Although his beloved woman had been ruined like this, he still said to Lin Xiao sincerely, "Thank you for helping me find Xiao Zhen." Lin Xiao took the clothes and waved at him carelessly. You're welcome. I didn't help for nothing. Then she glanced at Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue knew what she meant and said, I see. I have asked Xiaoqing to take care of your people just now. There will be 50 more people in the afternoon. Don't worry. Lin Xiao continued to ask him, then can I ask you the question just now? Wu Qingyue looked at her curiously and said, as a condition for answering the question, can I see what you look like without your sunglasses? Lin Xiao was speechless. After 3 seconds of silence, she raised her hand and took off her sunglasses without hesitation. She had a beautiful face, and then her eyelids opened. Chen Yuding, who was next to her, was shocked and jumped back. Leader, she is... Chen Yuding pointed at Lin Xiao's dark green eyes and looked at Wu Qingyue in panic. Wu Qingyue looked at Lin Xiao's face and thought that she was quite beautiful when she recovered her appearance. However, he felt that he had seen her somewhere before. Have we met somewhere before? Lin Xiao put her sunglasses back on calmly. She said, answer my question first. Xiao Budian is not your biological daughter, right? As soon as she finished speaking, Wu Qingyue was silent. The smile on his face also disappeared. No one could tell what he was thinking at this time with his expressionless face. Chen Yuding, who was next to her, looked at her in surprise and then at Wu Qingyue. At this moment, footsteps were heard at the door. Meng Yu, who was holding Wu Yueling, appeared with Dr. Liang and M.O. Li. Chapter 328. As soon as he saw Dr. Liang, Chen Yuding immediately rushed to him. Dr. Liang, please save my wife. Please, you must save her. Liang Dashu said to him, don't worry, let me see. As he spoke, he walked into the room and leaned against the bed. He bent down to check Shen Yuzhen's face and facial features. Then he picked up her wrist and checked her pulse. After a while, Liang Dashu frowned slightly. Just as he was about to put her arm down, he suddenly saw a needle mark on her arm. He was stunned and his expression changed slightly. He carefully opened her eyes again and looked at her for a while. Then he pressed on the area around the needle hole on her arm. When he put Shen Yuzhen's hand back on the bed, he stood up with a very heavy expression. He looked at Chen Yuding and sighed. Seeing him sigh, Chen Yuding only felt his scalp go numb and panic appeared in his eyes. She's on her last breath, but it's possible that she's relieved after she saw you. Under normal circumstances, she should be dead by now. However, I just checked and found that her body isn't completely dead. It's just that her consciousness has disappeared. In other words, her body is protected by some kind of energy, but her brain has stopped working. Liang Dashu looked at him and said. Then he looked at Wu Qingyue and asked, did you guys give her the water that Yuan Tianxin gave Lingling? Because that energy is the same as the energy in Lingling's body. Wu Qingyue turned to look at Chen Yuding. After hearing Liang Dashu's words, Chen Yuding was dumbfounded. Although he didn't quite understand what Liang Dashu meant, he only knew that his Xiao Zhan wouldn't wake up. Because the doctor said that her consciousness had disappeared, Dr. Liang saw that Wu Qingyue didn't say anything and only looked at Lin Xiao. He knew he was right, but he didn't care about that and turned to Chen Yuding and said, to put it nicely, she's now a vegetable. Only her body functions are still alive, and her brain has entered a state of suspended animation. After a pause, he looked at the others. Then he said, there's one more thing. She was injected with the zombie virus not long ago. The virus has spread throughout her blood. So in her current state, the probability of her turning into a zombie is 100%. When he said that, everyone except Lin Xiao looked at him in shock. Meng Yu subconsciously carried Wu Yueling to the other side, far away from the bed. But soon, Meng Yu's gaze followed Wu Qingyue to look at Lin Xiao. Chen Yuding, who had been struck by several lightning bolts, suddenly woke up. He rushed to Lin Xiao's side, bent his knees, and knelt in front of her. He lowered his head and said, Miss Chun, can you help me? Even if Xiao Jin turns into a zombie, I don't want her to forget me. You must have a way, right? Because you are... In the end, he raised his head and looked at Lin Xiao with pleading eyes. The others all looked at Lin Xiao. Some were confused, some were deep in thought, and some were expectant. Lin Xiao silently looked at Chen Yuding for more than 10 seconds before saying, You love her very much, even if she turns into a zombie. Although Chen Yuding wasn't very handsome, his character was upright. From the current situation, it could be seen that he cared about his lover very much. The kind of sadness and despair, Lin Xiao didn't need to touch him to clearly feel it. He was a sincere man, and looking at his pleading eyes, even if she gave him any conditions, he would probably do it. Even if she asked him to die, he might not hesitate. Lin Xiao nodded and said, I can save her, but I don't know what the final result will be. Whether she will remember you, and whether she will retain her memory. If I can make her remember you again, then you have to promise me one thing. The blood red in Chen Yuding's eyes almost turned into liquid, but he nodded happily. I promise you anything. Lin Xiao said, if I can save her, you must bring her to our new base. Chen Yuding was stunned when he heard her condition, then looked at her blankly. That's it? Nothing else? He thought that this Miss Liu would ask him to do something for her. Even if he had to go through a mountain of swords or a sea of fire, he would do it, but he didn't expect the other party's condition to be so simple. She just wanted him to move home. Chen Yuding couldn't believe his ears. Lin Xiao nodded indifferently and said, yes, no other requirements. Hearing this, Chen Yuding quickly nodded. I'm willing. If you need manpower, I'll bring a few brothers there. Lin Xiao looked at him and said, up to you. But she didn't ask him to bring this woman there because she was short of manpower. She was just afraid that this woman would eventually become a zombie. If she still had reason and memory, she could only stay in her base. Then she could only stay in her base. There was no way she could survive here. Wu Qingyue suddenly said, she is just worried that if your wife becomes a zombie, she can't survive here. But in her base, at least she can protect her, right? Then he looked at Lin Xiao meaningfully. Lin Xiao. This man was really a leader. He could actually guess her thoughts. Only then did Chen Yuding's expression change. He was stunned. Then he immediately looked at Lin Xiao gratefully. Thank you, thank you. Lin Xiao waved her hand and said, don't thank me. I haven't saved her yet. Besides, it's getting late. I'm going to take your wife into my space now. Remember to go to the square at noon. Go with everyone. Okay, I'll listen to you. Chen Yuding nodded. He stood up from the ground. Wu Qingyue looked at Lin Xiao and said, are you going to take my woman away like this? Lin Xiao looked at him and shrugged. It's his own choice, he said. At this time, Wu Yueling seemed to feel that Lin Xiao was about to leave, so she twisted and slid down from Meng Yu's arms. Meng Yu looked at her strangely, lingling. Where are you going? Then she ran to Lin Xiao. Lin Xiao walked to the bed and touched Shen Yuzhen's neck. Then he pulled her hands up and disappeared in a flash. Then, just as she was pulling Shen Yuzhen up, she suddenly felt a weight on her leg. Then she, Shen Yuzhen, and Xiao Budian, who was suddenly hanging on her leg, disappeared into thin air. Looking at his daughter, who was running with someone else, Wu Qingyue said, was he going to be abandoned? Although he wasn't my biological son, I've raised him since he was born. His little baby was going to abandon him. Chapter 329. Holding Shen Yuzhen naked in his arms, Lin Xiao looked at the little pendant on his leg with a strange expression. Your father will be sad, she said to the pendant, amused. Seeing Lin Xiao suddenly come in with a woman in his arms, Lu Jun and Xiu Lily looked at her curiously. Then he saw that there was a pendant on her leg, hugging her calf. Oh, little girl. Ming Ming was the most excited to see the little guy. She suddenly jumped out of the woods and ran towards Lin Xiao. The little guy immediately hid behind Lin Xiao's leg. Then, half of its head popped out and looked at Ming Ming with two sparkling eyes. Don't scare her, Lin Xiao told Ming Ming. How was he scaring her? Ming Ming was not annoyed that Wu Yueling was avoiding him. He only protested against what Lin Xiao had said. At this time, there was a sudden surge in the lake, and a few jade-white vines broke out of the water. He reached out to Lin Xiao. Little man woke up, but as soon as she appeared, Ming Ming, who had just arrived in front of Lin Xiao, ignored Wu Yueling. She abruptly turned her head to look at Little Man in the lake, then turned around and ran into the woods. Little Man, you're awake? Lin Xiao looked at Little Man's vines stretching over and stretched out a finger to catch her. Little Man said happily, Mama, Little Man is hungry. Is this person going to give Little Man food? With that said, Little Man's other rattan poked Shen Yuzhen in Lin Xiao's arms. Lin Xiao shook his head and said, Don't worry. This man is no different from being dead. There's only a virus in my body. I can't let you eat it. Wait a moment. I'll go get the corpse core for you. Little Man said. Then Little Man, let her come back to life. Mommy, just give me the energy core. I can use this person to filter the energy. Lin Xiao nodded and said, Then take her away first. I'll go find you a corpse core. As she spoke, she handed Shen Yuzhen to Little Man, and then Little Man took it. Only then did he bend over to pick up Tiny Tot. Then he turned around and walked towards space number 2. Lin Xiao remembered that in the space of the bald robber, there were still a lot of corpse cores left. Seeing Lin Xiao walking over with Tiny Tot in his arms, the zombie leaders in space number 2 all looked at Tiny Tot covetously, but they didn't dare to move. Lin Xiao walked to the door and said to the zombies inside, Number 4, take out the zombie core. You guys didn't eat it secretly, right? The zombies who were suspected of stealing food shook their heads in unison. Number 4 quickly turned around and ran to the corner to search. Soon, he came back with a pile of corpse cores in his hands. Lin Xiao took out all the level 5 and level 4 beasts and left the rest for them. 2. The zombies said. Ling said. Qibing Ling said. Ling said. Ling said. Lin Xiao carried Xiao Buddy in one hand and grabbed a corpse core in the other. Prone, he said. Ling said pinning. He said Ling pinning. He. Ling said he. Man Ling said. He. And in Ling Xiao said. Lin Xiao said. Ling Xiao. She was dead, but someone injected zombie blood into her body. She was already dead, but someone injected zombie blood into her body. Why are you helping her? Qiu Lily asked. I'm not helping her. Her man loves her so much. Lin Xiao said, I'm not trying to help her. I just saw that her man loves her so much. That man said he wouldn't give up on her even if she became a zombie. I want to see if it's true. After all, that man said that even if she becomes a zombie, he will not give up on her. I want to see if it is true. Lu Jun said, You really want to help her? Lin Xiao spread his hands and said, No, I just casually did it. Even if I don't agree, that man will find a way to make me agree. Lu Jun and Qiu Lily looked at her strangely. That man? Is he the woman's lover? They thought Lin Xiao was talking about the man, but Lin Xiao shook her head. No, it's her father. She looked down at Tiny Tot. Lu Jun and Qiu Lily looked at her with confusion. Lin Xiao didn't say anything to them. Okay, I'll take her out. I don't know how long it will take for this woman to complete her mutation. At this time, the people outside looked at each other. Meng Yu said, Brother Yu, it seems that it won't be long. Lingling doesn't care about her father anymore. Wu Qinghua looked at the gray rabbit who was running around the room looking for Lin Xiao or Tiny Tot and nodded silently. Liang Dashu asked curiously, Leader, why did that strange woman ask you if Lingling is your daughter? Meng Yu also looked at Wu Qinghua. When they met Wu Qinghua, Wu Yueling was already by his side. He had always said that she was his daughter, but no one doubted whether she was his biological daughter or not. Wu Qinghua sighed and saw that there was no one in the room. In addition to Meng Yu, Chen Yuding, Liang Dashu, and Mo Li who had been silent, there were only himself and Miss Liu who had just disappeared. He said, Lingling is not my daughter. She's just the daughter of a very good friend of mine. When the child was born, the apocalypse happened. My friend turned into a zombie so that he wouldn't hurt the newborn child. His wife fought with him and jumped down from more than 10 stories high. Everyone quieted down and looked at him quietly. Wu Qinyue's smile had a trace of hidden sadness, and he said, When I found him, the child was almost dead. So, after I rescued her, I kept her by my side and raised her like my own daughter. Lin Xiao appeared and said, Is it because I feel that her blood is different from yours? She's not your biological daughter. She's your adopted daughter. Seeing Lin Xiao come out, Chen Yuding immediately rushed to her and asked, How is it? Can little Jin still wake up? Lin Xiao put Tiny Tot on the ground and said to him, I don't know yet. We need to wait to know the situation. The others looked at Wu Qingyue in surprise, and then looked at Wu Yueling, who was put on the ground by Lin Xiao, and ran to Wu Qingyue. Meng Yu suddenly looked at Wu Yueling and asked Wu Qingyue, "Does she know?" Wu Qingyue nodded and said, "She knows. I didn't hide it from her." Lin Xiao said to Qin Yuding, "Remember to go with us in the afternoon." Then she turned around and walked out. Liang Dashu stared at Lin Xiao's back until she walked out of the room and went through the living room. Then he asked the others, "Does she really have a way to save people?" "Maybe." Wu Qingyue gave him an ambiguous answer and then shouted to Wu Yueling, who was holding the gray-haired Mian, "Lingling, let's go." Chapter 330. On the other side was a luxurious apartment building in Zone B. The facilities of this apartment building were very high-end. There were 7 solar energy storage devices installed on the roof, enough to supply the entire building with electricity. There was also a large pool on the roof where water ability users would go to replenish the water every day. Moreover, this apartment building was very new. At this time, in a luxurious apartment on the top floor, Yang Yin was angrily pacing back and forth in the living room. Her emotions were very unstable as she shouted at a man who looked to be in his 30s, sitting on the sofa, "Big brother, won't you help me? I don't care who they are or what their relationship is with Wu Qingyue. Anyway, they scared my Debeo. I want them dead. Even if they don't die, I will break one of their arms or legs." The man sitting on the sofa looked to be in his 30s, but he was actually in his 40s. The man had a regular face, bright eyebrows, and a high nose bridge. He was a very attractive man, no matter how one looked at him. His facial features were 40% similar to Yang Yan's, but Yang Yan's was a lot gentler. There was also a soft and beautiful young woman hanging beside the man. Brother Chow, why are you so worried about Wu Qingyue? You can ask the robber to cause trouble for them. If the matter is exposed, they will be killed. If the matter is exposed, can't you just push the blame to him? What are you worried about?" The beautiful woman used her soft body to rub against Yang Chao's arm. She said coquettishly. Yang Chao turned back to look at her, then turned back to look at his sister. He said solemnly, "Both of you, don't cause trouble at this time. If Wu Qingyue finds out about my plan because of the trouble you caused, I will deal with you first. But look at my Debeo now. He has been hiding in the quilt since yesterday and pees his pants at the slightest provocation. He is also your nephew. Are you just going to leave him alone?" Yang Yin shouted at Yang Chao. "Tisk." Yang Chao narrowed his eyes and said impatiently, "Then why did you let Debeo provoke those people? He was even taught a lesson on the spot. Isn't that enough?" Yang Yan's expression froze. Then she continued to say indignantly, "I just don't like that long-haired woman. It was her good fortune that second brother liked her, but she didn't know what was good for her. I just want Debeo to teach her a lesson and help second brother vent his anger. What's wrong with that?" The beautiful woman beside Yang Chao watched Yang Yin finish speaking before turning to Yang Chao and saying, "Big sister Yin is also doing this for brother Huey's own good. There's nothing wrong with that." Seeing that the woman was speaking up for her, Yang Yin felt even more confident. Shaoran is right. Big brother, quickly think of a way to deal with those people. I don't care about the others, but I'm going to kill that succubus with sunglasses. It's best to chop off her hands and feet, then throw her into Area F and let those stinky and dirty refugees take turns on her until she dies. Yang Chao frowned and said, "Shut up. Who do you think she is? She dared to make a move in front of everyone in the hall. Was she that easy to deal with? Besides, I sent someone to check on them yesterday. The woman you mentioned came and went without a trace. My men couldn't find any clues about her at all. Moreover, Wu Qingyue is now cooperating with them. He can use this as an excuse to attack us first." Ah bang! After hearing his words, Yang Yin screamed very violently. Then, she suddenly bent down and swept the teapot on the coffee table to the ground. "This won't do, that won't do. Then what do you want me to do? Watch my Debeo be scared like this for no reason? If the child has any sequelae in the future, who will I look for to reason with?" Yang Chao looked at her crazy appearance and covered his forehead with one hand. Okay. Calm down first. Your ability isn't stable to begin with, and if it erupts again, you'll be in trouble. If it erupts again, you'll be the one suffering. I'll deal with this matter. Go back and look after the Bayo now. No, I'm not going back. Yang Yin blurted out in an unstable mood. Go back. Seeing that not only did she not calm down, but she was also being unreasonable, Yang Chao could only shout at her. Yang Yin, who had been yelled at, was stunned. Then she turned around unwillingly and walked out the door. At this time, Yang Chao said to the woman beside him, "You should also go back." Oh! The woman was stunned. Then she stood up obediently. After walking a few steps, she turned around and asked, "Then can I come back at night?" Yang Chao said lightly, "I'll send someone to inform you." Okay then. The woman turned around unwillingly. Yang Chao looked at the time and then stood up. He went to the kitchen and boiled a pot of water. Then he took out the coffee powder, which was very luxurious in the apocalypse, and made a cup of instant coffee. After stirring it with a fork, he carried the coffee to the balcony and stood there. His eyes looked into the distance as he drank the freshly brewed coffee mouthful by mouthful. When he finished the cup of coffee, he turned around and entered the house. Just then, he heard someone knocking on the door. Then a soldier opened the door and came in. "Leader, Mr. Tang is here." Yang Chao nodded. "Let him in." The soldier opened the door and saw a man walk in. After Tang he came in, he watched the soldier behind him close the door. Then he walked to the sofa in the living room. "Sit first. I'll make the coffee," Yang Chao said as he took the cup to the kitchen and made 2 more cups of coffee. Then he walked out with it. Tangy looked at him and said, "Those people are going to set off today. Apart from Lin Feng, who has just reached rank 6, there are a few rank 5 ability users leading them. That Yuan Tianqing actually didn't go with them. Isn't he afraid that something will happen?" Yang Chao pushed a cup of coffee to the coffee table in front of him and said, "No, you just didn't see that there are some experts hidden behind them." Tangy heard his words and asked curiously, "Experts? You mean there's someone behind him?" Yang Chao nodded. "There's one person who doesn't seem to be simple. I sent someone to investigate yesterday, but they didn't find anything." Tangy said, "Then according to what you said, that person might set off with the Lin family? You don't know his background. Will it affect me if I make a move here?" Yang Chao shook his head and said, "No, the plan needs to be changed. You don't need to go with them. You just need to capture this woman in the base. I'll handle the rest." As he said that, he took out a photo and placed it on the table. Then he pushed it toward him. The woman in the photo was Lin Wenwen's face and long black hair. Tang He looked at the woman in the photo. A light flashed in his eyes, and he licked his lips. He stared at the photo and asked, "This woman is very hot. Who is she?" Yang Chao said, "She's the youngest sister of the Lin family. You can do whatever you want with her after capturing her. But hide her from me. I have a plan for the next step." Chapter 331. When he heard Yang Chao say that he wanted to secretly capture this woman and then give her to him as a toy, he was shocked. Tang He looked at him in surprise. "Huh? You don't intend to keep such a graceful beauty for yourself? You gave it to me?" Yang Chao said, "I can give this one to you, but leave the one with the katana beside her to me. I need a change of taste." Tang He smirked and said, "Oh, so you like this type now? All right then." Yang Chao indifferently glanced at him and said, "It won't be too late for you to make a move when Wu Qingyue leads the army out to pack up winter supplies. However, you can't kill this woman, but don't keep her for too long either, because I want to put the zombie virus on her and then let her become a zombie and go crazy in the base. This way, we can use the fact that they might be infected by the zombie virus to control them. At that time, even if Wu Qingyue wants to rush back, it will be too late." Tang He looked at him and said with a smile, "Your plan is too sinister, but I like it." Yang Chao drank a cup of coffee and continued confidently, "I've received intelligence that Wu Qingyue will be setting off in 2 days. So, you have to endure it for now." Tang He nodded and said, "All right. I'll wait for them to leave before making my move." On the other side of the square, Lin Xiao returned to the gathering place and looked at the time. It was already noon. Apart from Wu Qingyue's 350 men, everyone else was called over. Seeing Lin Xiao return, everyone looked at her curiously. Li Zheng asked, How is it? Did you find him? Lin Xiao nodded. We found him, but his condition isn't good. What's going on? The woman's curiosity makes Mrs. Lin and Cheng Wangxue come closer. Lin Xiao said, it's no different from death. When it was almost 2:00 in the afternoon, Xiao Yunlong and Chen Yuding were seen driving an off-road vehicle, followed by several modified Jiefeng 141s, which were full of soldiers. The other one was empty. Seeing that the car had arrived, Lin Xiao said to Lin Feng, the car is here. Let's do a head count and get on the car. Lin Feng turned his head knowingly and shouted to Li Zheng and the others, Li Zheng, do a head count and get in the car. That one is empty. As he spoke, he pointed at the last empty car. Li Zheng and the others immediately gathered the 20 or so people behind them and got them into the car. Lin Xiao stood on the spot and casually glanced around. There are quite a lot of spies, but I don't know which powers they are. After getting in the car drove towards the gate of the base. Xie Dong, who was in a corner of the square, silently watched Lin Xiao and the others leave before walking towards the mechanism building. Because Lin Wenwen stayed in the base, even though Long Qingying and Yuan Tianqing were there. However, it was hard to guarantee that no one would attack them from behind, so Lin Xiao kept Xie Dong here. As long as he didn't speak, no one would know what was wrong with him. His level was not high, but because his ability had been restored, he had risen to level 4. But he was a zombie, so he was very sensitive to the behavior of others. Therefore, it shouldn't be a problem to secretly protect Lin Wenwen. Lin Xiao walked towards a corner that no one was paying attention to, and then disappeared. No one could sense her movements. Even Xiao Yunlong, Lin Feng, and the others did not know her whereabouts. In any case, she would naturally appear when she felt like it was time for her to appear. Sure enough, after a few kilometers out of the base, Lin Xiao appeared on the roof of the last car. Anyway, the location of the map was given to Lin Feng, who was in front, so Lin Xiao silently followed behind. At this time, in the lake in Lin Xiao's space, Lu Jun sat on the sofa and watched Tong Tong play with the grass plane that Lin Xiao made for him. Qiu Lily was still lazily lying on the other sofa, playing with her long hair. Suddenly, there was a wave on the lake, and then a woman slowly walked up from the lake. Her head was lowered, and her long hair was wet and covered her entire face. He limped over, completely naked. She's up. Qiu Lily immediately sat up from the sofa, then stretched out her nose and sniffed. She turned into a zombie, but her breath is a bit strange. It's not like a normal zombie. Lu Jun thought for a moment and said, it's the same as Xie Dong's. Qiu Lily's eyes immediately lit up. Oh yes, they are the same. At this time, a figure flashed by the lake. Lin Xiao suddenly appeared, stood by the lake, and watched the woman walk in. Lu Jun stood up, walked to Qiu Lily's big wardrobe, and found a set of clothes. Now, Qiu Lily's big wardrobe not only had the clothes that Qiu Lily had collected before, but also many kinds of clothes that Lin Xiao had collected later. And even the wardrobe had a few more clothes. Lu Jun took the clothes and walked behind Lin Xiao, watching the woman in the water walk up like a female ghost with disheveled hair. Lin Xiao watched her stagger in front of him, and then stopped. Her hanging hair kept dripping water, and her body was lifeless. Raise your head, Lin Xiao said to her. Xin Yuzhen slowly raised her head, and a pair of empty eyes peeked out from the gap of her hair. She looked at Lin Xiao blankly, and her eyes were very blank. Lin Xiao felt the breath on her body, and it was completely the same as Xie Dong's. And it also carried an inexplicable connection with him. So when Xin Yuzhen walked out of the water, she directly came to him. It was probably this connection that made her walk over unconsciously. Hearing Lin Xiao's question, Xin Yuzhen's blank eyes were stunned, and then she seemed to be thinking. Slowly, her eyes became clear, and hatred, anger, despair, love, shock, and other complex emotions intertwined in her eyes. In her eyes, they were still white. Like Xie Dong, her appearance didn't change much. She didn't have the dark eyes of a zombie and no dark circles. Except for the pale skin, she was no different from a normal person. But Lin Xiao knew that she probably couldn't speak. Sure enough, Xin Yuzhen opened her mouth. Just as she wanted to say something, she quickly stopped. Her eyes flashed with doubt. Roar! Lin Xiao nodded. Okay, I got it. You still have your memory, that's all. At least I didn't break my promise to Chen Yuding. Shen Yuzhen heard him mention Chen Yuding, and her eyes flashed with tenderness. She nodded, thought for a moment, and then opened her mouth. Roar, roar! Thank you. Lin Xiao shook his head and said, Don't thank me, I also have a condition. In the future, you and Chen Yuding can only leave Sea City Base and follow me. Lu Jun, who was on the side, took the clothes and handed them to Shen Yuzhen, and said to her, Have you realized your current identity? Shen Yuzhen took the clothes and saw Lu Jun's eyes. She was stunned for a moment but didn't care much. After hearing Lu Jun's words, she stopped putting on the clothes. Then she nodded. Chapter 332. Shen Yuzhen remembered what had happened before, even though she was completely unconscious at the end. But after Chen Yuding and the others found her, she became sober again. She also heard some of Dr. Liang's words. She remembered that the doctor said that she was infected with the zombie virus. She couldn't speak and her hands and feet were stiff. She felt that she was no longer a living person. Shen Yuzhen raised a hand and covered the position of her heart. Just as she had expected, there was no pulsating sensation. Lin Xiao said, Put on your clothes first. Chen Yuding is outside. If you want to see him, I'll send you out. Shen Yuzhen suddenly shook her head violently, as if she didn't want to see Chen Yuding again. Lin Xiao knew what she was thinking and said to her, You haven't changed. You're no different from before. Don't you want to see him? And if he loves you, he shouldn't care about this. Shen Yuzhen lowered her head and silently put on her clothes. Lin Xiao said, Well, you can stay here if you don't want to. Get used to your current state and identity. Shen Yuzhen put on her clothes, then looked up at Lin Xiao and Lu Jun. She turned her head and looked around. Suddenly, she raised her nose and sniffed in the direction of the sofa. Then her eyes were tightly glued to Tong Tong on the sofa. Lu Jun saw her slowly showing a hungry look and said to her, That's my son. You can't do anything to him. If you're really hungry, go drink the water in the lake. It can suppress your hunger. Shen Yuzhen was stunned, and then turned to look at the lake behind her in surprise. Lin Xiao saw that she had no other questions and turned to leave the space. Roar! Wait a minute! Feeling that Lin Xiao was about to leave, Shen Yuzhen suddenly called her. Lin Xiao looked back at her and asked, What's wrong? Roar! Can I go out? Shen Yuzhen looked at her and asked. Lin Xiao looked at her and said, Are you going back to take revenge? She crossed her arms in front of her chest and raised one hand to touch her chin and said to Shen Yuzhen, Although I cut off one of those people's legs, they are not dead. But now they are all in the hands of Wu Qingyue. It seems that Wu Qingyue wants to use them to deal with Yang Chao. If you want to go back and kill them, Wu Qingyue probably won't let you do it now. Roar! It wasn't them. Shen Yuzhen shook her head and said to her. Lin Xiao's eyes flashed as he looked at her. You mean the mastermind? Could it not be Yang Chao's younger brother, or his subordinate? She knew that Yang Chao's younger brother, Yang Hui, and one of his deputy chiefs were the people she saw fighting with Chen Yuding that day. They all like to make a move on other people's women behind their backs and then destroy the corpses to get rid of the evidence. Shen Yuzhen lowered her head slightly, and her aura became a little irritable. Roar! I want to tear him apart with my own hands. Lin Xiao looked at her in silence for a moment. Lu Jun didn't know what happened to Shen Yuzhen, but he saw that her emotions were so unstable. He could roughly guess that she had encountered some sort of injustice or bad thing. Does she want to go back and take revenge? The enemy is a high-ranking official in High City? Lin Xiao nodded and said, The relationship between her husband and Wu Qingyue is a bit sensitive. Therefore, Wu Qingyue's enemies started to attack her. Their main purpose should be to hurt her husband and Wu Qingyue. Thinking of a woman falling into the hands of those men with status in the base after the doomsday, Lu Jun thought. Lu Jun just silently looked at Shen Yuzhen. Lin Xiao thought for a moment and said to Shen Yuzhen, Well, your current situation is not stable yet, and you haven't familiarized yourself with your body. Besides, even if you go out, you can't enter the base like this. I'll take you in the next time I go back. Don't worry, I won't let you wait too long. Shen Yuzhen saw that she promised to take her back, so she nodded. She didn't have any thoughts of protesting against the other zombies here. So when Lin Xiao said that she would take her back, she felt relieved. In the base, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying stood by the window of the mission hall, watching Lin Xiao's motorcade leave. Long Qingying looked at her disapprovingly. You should go with them, even if you have to stay to help the deputy chief. It's too dangerous for you to stay here and let your brother stay. Lin Wenwen shook her head and said, I'm not afraid of danger. Brother Tianqing is here. He won't let anything happen to me. At this time, Lin Wenwen talked about Yuan Tianqing. There was a faint trace of love in her eyes, but it quickly disappeared. But Long Qingying saw it and said to her, You should know that the deputy chief has someone else in his heart. Do you think this is equivalent? Lin Wenwen turned her head to look at Yuan Tianqing and the others in the distance, then looked back at her and smiled. If one day he forgets my sister, then he might see me by his side. Even if I have to wait until death, it will be worth it. Long Qingying sighed and didn't say anything. Lin Wenwen liked Yuan Tianqing, but Yuan Tianqing liked her sister. She couldn't walk into his heart, but she didn't want to leave or give up. Now that Lin Xiao, the leader of hell, was dead, maybe this was an opportunity. Although Lin Wenwen never thought that her sister would die. So now, as long as there was a chance, she wanted to get closer to Yuan Tianqing. On the other side of the base, in the small building of Wu Qingyue's house, Wu Yueling was chasing a gray-furred rabbit on the empty ground in the living room. She seemed to be having a good time. The gray-furred rabbit was like a big gray ball, jumping around on the ground. It didn't jump far away, but just around Wu Yueling. Xiao Liqing found a sealed box and said to Wu Qingyue, who was sitting on the sofa reading documents, Found it. Wu Qingyue looked up and saw the box in his hand. He nodded and said, Give it to Yuan Tianqing. We're going out tomorrow, and I don't think we can wait for her to come back. Just ask Yuan Tianqing to give it to her. Xiao Liqing nodded, then turned around and left. Soon, Xiao Liqing found Yuan Tianqing in the mission office. Deputy Chief Yuan. He walked over and greeted Yuan Tianqing with a smile. Yuan Tianqing turned around and saw it was him. He smiled and said, Little Chung, don't call me Deputy Chief anymore. I'm not that anymore. Just call me Mr. Yuan. Xiao Liqing nodded and said with a smile, Okay, Mr. Yuan. He took out the box and handed it to him. This is what our chief asked you to give to Miss Liu in the sunglasses. We'll have to trouble you to help. Yuan Tianqing, Lin Wenwen, and Long Qingying all looked curiously at the box that he handed over. What's this? Xiao Liqing said, Contact lenses. As soon as he said that, the others immediately nodded. Oh. Chapter 333. At 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Lin Xiao's motorcade entered the center of Hangzhou. Are we going to Hangzhou Zombie City? The workers who came here by themselves were a little panicked. Looking at the increasing number of zombies around them, these people showed fear in their eyes. Especially those who were ordinary people. We're not going back. You're all liars. Did you bring us here to use us as bait? Yes. We're not going. Although Chun Yuding's team members didn't shout, they were also panicking. Only a few of them seemed to be unafraid. Hey, what are you panicking about? It's just a zombie. If one comes, we'll blow its head off. If two comes, we'll also blow its head off. It's better than going back without food. A buzzing voice sounded. Everyone looked and saw a big guy who was at least 9 meters tall. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes, a wide face, and a high nose. His hair was cut flat, but it was uneven. It seemed that it wasn't cut by a professional hairdresser. The others looked at him and said loudly, You're a psychic. Of course you're not afraid of zombies. You can get food from any mission in the base. How can you be hungry? The big guy shook his head and said naively, Oh, the food I get from the mission isn't enough for me, and I don't dare to go out alone. The others don't want to go out with me. At this time, a faint voice suddenly said, Why are you so anxious? Look carefully. Those zombies don't dare to come near us. Didn't you notice? The others looked towards the voice and saw a young man wearing a very old square-frame glasses, sitting on the side with his arms crossed. His eyes under the glasses were staring at the road outside of the car, observing something. Then he turned his head and looked at Lin Yu's team, who had been quiet, before moving his eyes away. When the others saw him, they seemed to be infected by his indifferent aura. Suddenly, they calmed down a little and looked outside as well. Then as they watched, they really saw the zombies on the road after discovering their team. They didn't crazily rush towards them. Instead, their movement seemed to freeze for a moment. Then they turned around and ran away. What? It's true. They all ran away. What's going on? The tall man looked around in surprise. Quick, look over here. It looks like it too. No wonder it was so peaceful along the way. There were no zombies. Lin Xiao, who was sitting in front, turned his head to look at the people behind him, then turned his head back. Chen Yuding and Lin Feng, who were in front, followed the map given by Lin Xiao. After walking for half an hour, they arrived at the government complex in Uptown. It really took a long time to get in, because they had been blocking the way all the way. Their car was too big, and they could not go around small roads. He had no choice but to get down and push away the abandoned cars on the road before he could drive through. When they arrived at the government complex, it took them quite some time to get there. Fortunately, there were a lot of people in the carriage. If they couldn't get through, the soldiers would go down and open up a path, or he could just use his special ability. But their destination wasn't here, but the Victoria Hotel on the other side. They were just passing by. When they were about to reach the hotel, Lin Xiao suddenly stood up. Then, with a leap of his legs, he directly jumped onto the car in front of him and continued to jump forward. He directly jumped in front of Lin Feng's car. Wait here for a moment. Lin Xiao stopped their car on the road and said to the people in the car. She turned and walked toward the hotel on the side of the road. Xiao Yunlong poked his head out of the window. What is she going to do? Chen Yuding shook his head. Lin Feng said, "We'll clear the zombies?" The others looked at him. Why did she have to go alone to clear the zombies? Wouldn't it be faster if there were more people? Lin Feng said, "In fact, most of the zombies nearby have escaped. She's just going to find those who are still hiding in the hotel. Also, think about her identity. The moment she releases her aura, it won't be a problem. Once she releases her breath, she doesn't even need to do anything. Those zombies will run away by themselves." Xiao Yunlong nodded. Just now, after they had asked the question, they had already remembered the identity of this Miss Liu. Lin Xiao walked into the hotel. The hotel wasn't high, but it was spacious, and there were more than 200 rooms. And the decoration inside was very good. If the power supply could be connected to solar energy, it could be used as a residence. There was also a commercial square opposite, and the location was very good. Originally, there were a lot of zombies in this area, but after sensing that Lin Xiao was coming with the convoy, they all scrambled to escape. Lin Xiao entered the hotel and then strolled around the hotel. Then the people outside saw a few zombies suddenly jump out of the window upstairs of the hotel. After waiting for another 10 minutes, they saw Lin Xiao come out. She stood on the road in front of the hotel and waved to them. "It's okay, come down." After Xiao Yunlong and the others drove the car over, the soldiers all got out of the car. Lin Xiao said to Xiao Yunlong, Lin Feng, and Chen Yuding, who came in front of her, "Before the end of the work, we will stay in this hotel. There are more than 200 rooms here, which is enough. Do you have any objections?" The three shook their heads at her. Anyway, she had the final say on the location. Even if they wanted to object, they couldn't find a reason, because she was the existence that controlled absolute security. If they objected to her, what would they do if she directly turned around and left? If she left, the zombie horde not far from here was not a joke. There were thousands of them, and they could be exhausted to death. Seeing that they had no objections, Lin Xiao nodded. Then she said, "Oh, that's right. Leave the room on the top floor for us. Don't let anyone go up there, you know." Lin Feng and the others looked at each other and nodded knowingly. Lin Xiao turned around and suddenly jumped onto a tree on the side of the road, and then jumped from the tree to the roof of the hotel. She directly jumped up. Lin Feng and the other two immediately turned back and called out to their people. Then they gathered in the hotel lobby. Lin Xiao stood on the roof and flashed into the space, ready to release Chiu Lily and the other two. But as soon as she went in, she was entangled by a few jade white vines as soon as she stood firm. Little man seemed to be waiting for her. Mama, mama, mama. Little man wants to level up. Quickly help little man find a big energy nucleus. Lin Xiao looked at her in surprise. Hey, didn't I just give you a lot of level 4 or 5 corpse nuclei? Not enough? Little man said with a little dissatisfaction. Well, those are not even enough to fill the gap between little man's teeth, and they have already been transferred to the newcomer. As she spoke, little man pulled out a vine and pointed its tip in the direction of Xin Yuzhen. Lin Xiao looked at Xin Yuzhen and saw that she was sitting opposite Lu Jun and Qiu Lily. She looked a little reserved, as if she didn't dare to move. Maybe because she was too close to Qiu Lily, she was completely suppressed by her imposing manner. Chapter 334. Lin Xiao turned to Man Man and said, "Okay, then I'll find a way to catch a big one for you, or find some energy cores of mutant plants for you." Man Man heard this and said happily, "Yes, yes, Mommy, level up for me. Man Man wants to go out." Lin Xiao asked her in surprise, "You want to go out?" Man Man shook her vines and said, "I want to go." Lin Xiao nodded. It seemed that this child was tired of staying here. "All right, wait for me to finish dealing with the matters here first. I'll take you to find the energy core." Man Man happily shook her vines. Okay. Lin Xiao let her let go of her hand and then walked to Qiu Lily. "We're here. Go out and arrange your work and find a place you want to live." Qiu Lily and Lu Jun immediately stood up. Seeing that Lin Xiao was going to send them out, Meng Meng, who had been hiding in the forest, also ran out. Lin Xiao sent them out first, and then came in to send the zombies from the 1st to the 7th team out. Only Xin Yuzhen was left in the space. The zombies stood on the roof, and Lin Xiao said to everyone, "I told them that the roof and the floor below are all our territory. Everyone can pick their own rooms. As for the floors below, don't go down unless Lily and I give the order. Understand?" She said to the zombies 1 to 7, and then stared at Meng Meng, who had already slipped to the edge of the building and was looking down, and said, "And you, come back and listen to me." Meng Meng was curiously lying on the edge of the building, and when she was about to run to the other side, she was stopped by Lin Xiao. "Oh, got it." She walked over unwillingly. Lin Xiao said to Qiu Lily, "After I leave Lily, you and Meng Meng can't leave here together. Someone with a higher level has to stay, got it?" Qiu Lily nodded and said, "Got it. Then I'll go down and choose a room." Then she turned around and went downstairs with her 2 long ponytails swinging behind her. Lu Jun also silently carried Tong Tong down. Anyway, there was nothing for her to do here. Lin Xiao said to the remaining 8 zombies, "Remember the aura of these people. Then chase the surrounding zombies 2 kilometers away. Gather them and block all the entrances and exits. This is also your territory. You have to guard it yourselves. Understand?" Roar, got it. All the zombie leaders responded in unison. Lin Xiao continued, "Kill all those above level 3 and give me their corpse cores. If you can't beat your opponent, remember to ask for help from the person next to you. You guys are together now, so you have to help each other, okay?" Roar, "Oh." The zombie leaders, who were used to acting alone, reluctantly responded. Lin Xiao waved at them and said, "Go." 5 zombie leaders and 2 mutant zombies ran off in 7 different directions, quickly disappearing from Lin Xiao's line of sight. Only Meng Meng remained where she was, looking left and right. "Let's go down and find your own room," Lin Xiao said as he led her down the stairs. Following Qiu Lily's scent, they found a room. After entering, they saw Qiu Lily standing in the middle, waving her hands and using her wind ability to roll the dust in the room into a ball. Lu Jun wasn't here, but Lin Xiao knew that she was next door with Tong Tong. After Qiu Lily rolled the dust out the window and blew it into the air, it was blown away by the wind. But when she turned around, she saw Meng Meng rolling around on the bed she was looking at. "Ah, that bed is mine. You're putting your scent on it. Get off." Qiu Lily saw Meng Meng's actions and immediately yelled. She swung her long hair and rushed over, sending Meng Meng flying with a kick. Meng Meng reacted quickly and rolled off the bed, then poked her head out and said, "Roar, roar." I want to share a room with you. Chiu Lily wasn't having it. She stared at her and said, "Why do you want to share a room with me? There's only one bed here. Go to another room." Who knew that Meng Meng would just crawl under the bed? Roar, roar, no. Lin Xiao looked at the two of them. It was obvious that Meng Meng wanted to stay by Chiu Lily's side. "I'll be leaving for Haicheng Base in a while. On the way, I'll find a crystal core for little man. You guys keep an eye on this place. Don't let any outsiders cause trouble," Lin Xiao said as she stood at the door and prepared to leave. Chiu Lily was bending over by the bed, trying to pull Meng Meng out. When she heard Lin Xiao's words, she straightened up. "Huh, is it for little man? Is she going to level up again?" Lin Xiao walked to the door and replied, "Yes, she seems to want to come out very much." With that, she walked out of the room. She turned around and went to Lu Jun's room next door. She saw that Lu Jun had Tong Tong stand on the empty ground by the door. Then, she cleaned up the dust and rubbish in the room. "I'm going to leave for Haicheng now. Take Tong Tong with you. If there's anything, ask Lily for help," Lin Xiao said to her. Lu Jun was flipping through the old quilt on the bed. Then, she straightened up and looked at Lin Xiao. "Is little man coming out? She's probably tired of staying inside." Lin Xiao leaned against the door and nodded. "Maybe. Got it." Lu Jun nodded and suddenly thought of something. Then, she looked at her and asked, "By the way, why did you let Miss Wenwen stay in Haicheng? There are a lot of people there. What if she runs into trouble in the base? You're not there now." Lin Xiao said, "It's not that I want her to stay, it's that she wants to stay. If she doesn't want to go with me, can I still kidnap her? I respect her decision. And isn't Yuan Tianxing still in the base? He won't let anything happen to her." Recently, she had noticed the meaning behind the way Lin Wenwen looked at Yuan Tianxing. If the two of them were a couple, it wouldn't be a bad thing. If she handed her sister over to a former subordinate, at least she would know what he was like. This was much more reassuring than handing her over to other messy men in the apocalypse. Lu Jun shook his head and said with some worry, "Not necessarily. The situation in the base is starting to become unstable. If someone targets Miss Wenwen, I'm afraid even Deputy Leader Yuan will fall." Lin Xiao's eyes flashed. "Don't worry. As long as Wu Qingyue is still in the base these 2 days, those people won't dare to make a move. What's more, when I went out this time, I planned to immediately head back once I arrived here. It was only a 2-hour journey. Even if I went to find the energy core for little man on the way, I would return to Ocean City by tomorrow at the latest. They can't do anything in such a short period of time. Xiao Yunlong's car can be left behind." Lu Jun thought for a moment, nodded and said, "What you said is right. Just one night. I believe those people won't make a move so quickly." Chapter 335. After Lin Xiao came out of Lu Jun's room, she went downstairs. When she arrived at the hall, she saw that Lin Feng and the others had already cleaned up the sofa in the hall. Although it wasn't very clean, it was enough for people to sit on. In any case, people weren't so particular in the end of the world. Lin Xiao walked over and said to them, "You've already arranged it? I won't participate in the construction of the wall. We'll start after Yuan Tianxing comes. I'll go back to the base first. I have other things to do on the way, so I won't be going with you. Deputy Leader Xiao, you can walk slowly behind me." Lin Feng, Xiao Yunlong, and Chen Yuding all looked at her in surprise. "You're leaving? So fast? Alone?" Lin Xiao stood in front of them with her hands in her pockets and nodded. "Don't worry, I've already released the zombie team to chase away the zombies. I've also strictly ordered them to guard the periphery. Chiu Lily and Lu Jun will stay here, and I'll leave alone." Hearing that Chiu Lily was staying, the 3 people on the sofa were slightly relieved. "Okay then." Chen Yuding looked at her anxiously. "Little Zhen's situation," Lin Xiao said to him. "She hasn't woken up yet. I'll return her to you when she wakes up. Don't worry, nothing will happen." Chen Yuding looked down with a little disappointment, then nodded gratefully. "Okay." Lin Xiao turned and walked out of the hotel door. When she reached the road, she waved her hand. An unmodified off-road vehicle appeared on the road. She was now a mobile nouveau riche, getting whatever she wanted. Anyway, the things she collected in the space were not just furniture, clothes, and shoes. She also collected a lot of cars that could still be driven, big and small. She even picked up a few electric cars and fuel-efficient cars. Lin Xiao sat in the driver's seat, started the car, and drove back the way she came. She respected Shun Yuzhen's wishes and didn't tell Chen Yuding about her situation. Lin Xiao drove out of the upper city and headed back to Jiaxing. While sniffing in the car, she used her perception to pay attention to the movements along the way. It wasn't until she reached Nanhu that she sensed a very powerful level 5 zombie. It was almost at level 6, but it seemed to be a step away. Lin Xiao immediately turned the car around, retracted his aura, and drove in that direction. Not long after, Lin Xiao found herself in a botanical garden. That zombie was actually in the botanical garden. Lin Xiao stopped the car by the roadside, got off, and stored the car into the space. She looked at the botanical garden that had grown into a barren mountain forest. She searched silently for a while before she found the entrance and entered it invisibly. The botanical garden was very large, and the path inside was almost completely covered by the plants that had doubled in size. As for those mutant plants, Lin Xiao could not smell their scent. If the other party had concealed his aura, even Lin Xiao would not have been able to sense it. Lin Xiao could only follow the direction of the level 5 zombie, and at the same time, she carefully observed the surroundings. If he could find a mutated plant that had gained sentience, it might have an energy core. But just when Lin Xiao thought that she would not be able to find the mutated plants so easily, she suddenly felt a huge movement in front of her. The trees here were all very tall. She couldn't find the tallest one. So he gave up the idea of climbing up the tree to scout the situation and quickly sneaked in that direction on the ground. Roar! Suddenly, the roars of wild beasts came from the front. Hearing this, Lin Xiao felt a little strange. The sound sounded like that of a wild beast, but it did not sound like a normal wild beast. When Lin Xiao quietly approached, she saw the scene in front of her. She understood why the sound just now was like a wild beast, but also not like a wild beast. Because it was a zombie beast. Looking at its size, it was already as big as a male lion. The hair from its neck to its back was very long, and clumps of it stood up. The skin and flesh on its body were torn open, dripping with blood. Its pitch-black eyes were filled with an ominous glint, and its mouth was wide open, revealing a mouth full of sharp beast teeth. Roar! This was a giant zombie dog. Looking at the thick hair on its body, it had a terrifying dog head like the ghost mastiff. Its body was even stronger than a male lion, but its skin was bloody, and from time to time, there would be some thick black liquid dripping out of its wounds. It looked very horrifying. This was simply the incarnation of a hellhound. Lin Xiao silently stared at the zombie dog, and suddenly a kind of desire arose in her heart. If she could train this thing into a military dog, but soon, Lin Xiao was not in the mood to think about this because she was attracted by the zombie dog's opponent. It was the thing that she had been looking for, a mutated demonic tree. The tree looked very strange, and its trunk was very thick, with a diameter of about 1.5 meters. There was no bark on the trunk, and it was a very smooth kind of tree bone, but the color was dark red, and there were black intersecting veins flowing on it. And at the place where it forked up, there was a groove in the middle. There was a stench coming from there, and Lin Xiao could smell it from far away. It was the smell of a rotting flesh. There was not a single leaf on the branches above, but there were countless branches dancing wildly on the branches. In fact, the whole tree was twisting and moving, and those thick branches turned into tentacles like a group of demons dancing. Around the demonic tree, as long as it bent down to stretch its branches, the ground would be empty. This tree's aura was also very strong, even stronger than the vine that Lin Xiao encountered by the lake last time. But after looking for a while, Lin Xiao could not find the position of its energy core. Roar! The zombie dog stood at the edge of the open space, a place where the demonic tree could not reach. It lowered its limbs, raised its head, and roared at the demonic tree. Suddenly, it kicked its hind legs, turned into a black shadow, and rushed toward the demonic tree's trunk. It was very fast, like a flash of lightning. Lin Xiao felt that its speed was very fast, but the demonic tree's reaction was even faster than the zombie dog's. Before the zombie dog reached the demonic tree's trunk, all the branches of the demonic tree suddenly surrounded it. Layer by layer, it protected its trunk and then separated a part of its strength to sweep towards the black shadow. When the zombie dog saw that its attack was ineffective, it quickly turned around and jumped to the side, dodging the demonic tree's extended branches. But the zombie dog did not give up, and it suddenly went around the demonic tree and suddenly jumped behind it. Then it continued to rush toward the demonic tree. But this time, the demonic tree did not shrink its branches back. Instead, it suddenly bent down, as if it wanted to increase the distance between it and the zombie dog. However, the zombie dog had already pounced on it. Not good. When Lin Xiao saw the situation, she knew that the zombie dog was going to suffer. Sure enough, as soon as she finished speaking, the demonic tree that was bent very low suddenly bounced back with a hoo sound. And so, the branches instantly closed up, turning into a sturdy broom, and slapped the zombie dog back. Roar, the zombie dog screamed, and then fell heavily to the ground. Chapter 336. But soon, the zombie dog stood up from the ground without any problems. It shook its fur and continued to roar at the demonic tree. Roar dash, then it suddenly opened its mouth at the demonic tree, revealing a mouthful of white sharp teeth. Lin Xiao felt a surge of energy in its body. After a while, a surge of energy rushed out of the zombie dog's mouth. Roar dash, it roared at the demonic tree. A purplish-red flame came out of its mouth and rushed towards the demonic tree. When it encountered the purplish-red flame, the demonic tree suddenly shrank. Moreover, it bent back with all its might, trying to avoid the attack of the flame. There was a surge of energy in the middle of the demonic tree, as if it was protecting itself from being eroded by the flame. Thus, Lin Xiao watched as a level 5 zombie dog breathed fire from its mouth to burn a bald tree trunk that had shrunk into a ball. The zombie dog was also very strong. The fire in its mouth continued to burn for 2 to 3 minutes before stopping. Lin Xiao could feel that the temperature of the flame was very high, because although the surrounding plants were not burned, they quickly withered. The zombie dog's flames were controlled to only burn the demonic tree's area of effect, so it wouldn't affect the surrounding trees. But even so, the temperature of its flames still dried up the surrounding plants. Lin Xiao unconsciously retreated a distance. There was no other way, it was too hot. If it was an ordinary tree, after being burned by the zombie dog's flame for 2 to 3 minutes, not even ashes would be left. However, the demonic tree was only tightly wrapped into a ball like a giant black fist. No matter how the flame burned, it was not affected at all. The zombie dog saw that after burning for so long, there was no effect on the demonic tree, so it put away the flame. Then it bared its teeth and pounced at the demonic tree, using its front claws to claw at the demonic tree. Lin Xiao looked at the demonic tree in surprise. There was actually a wood that was not afraid of fire. How magical. Xiao dash, the zombie dog pounced forward with its equally sharp claws. It clawed at the demonic tree and then fell to the ground. Then it pounced again, using its claws to claw at the demonic tree. The flame was useless against the demonic tree, but the zombie dog's claws were particularly useful. Puff, 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 a few bare branches were immediately cut down by it. The demonic tree, which had its branches cut off by the zombie dog, seemed to shake violently. Then, he probably felt that the zombie dog might not be able to spit fire for a while, so he immediately let go of the tree fist. Countless branches spread out and immediately rolled towards the zombie dogs that pounced on them. The zombie dog's reaction wasn't fast enough, and its forelegs kicked the branches of the magic tree. When he bounced back, he was suddenly entangled by a tree branch that shot out fiercely. "Awah!" The zombie dog cried out in panic, and then it was suddenly pulled down by the demonic tree. Without waiting for the zombie dog to react, the other branches of the devil tree quickly wrapped around its hind legs. Then he started beating the zombie dog up and down. Bang! 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 Aoo! 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 Woo! Looking at the zombie dog that looked like a dead dog, Lin Xiao silently shed a drop of sweat for it. Well, Of course she didn't sweat. What a painful feeling, listening to the zombie dog's screams as it was slapped to the ground. Lin Xiao felt that even if it was a zombie, its internal organs would have been smashed. Just when the zombie dog was feeling dizzy from the slaps, the center of the magic tree suddenly opened up, as if it had opened its mouth. Then, Lin Xiao saw all the branches of the magic tree wrap around the zombie dog, especially tightly wrapping around its mouth and head, as if to prevent it from spitting fire again. Then, it dragged the zombie dog and threw it into the center of the magic tree. At this moment, Lin Xiao suddenly moved. She fiercely rushed towards the center of the magic tree. Previously, no matter how badly the magic tree fought with the zombie dog, it would always wrap the center with branches. Therefore, Lin Xiao only silently watched the battle. She didn't expect that the level 5 zombie dog wouldn't last long in the hands of the mutated demonic tree, and it was quickly taken care of. Seeing that the zombie dog was about to be dragged into the middle of the magic tree, Lin Xiao guessed that the magic tree was about to eat. Because of the stench of rotting corpses coming from the middle of the magic tree, it should be where the magic tree ate. Therefore, when she saw the magic tree wrap the zombie dog into a ball and drag it there, Lin Xiao seized the opportunity and rushed forward. Her speed was very fast, and in an instant, she flashed above the zombie dog. Then, she stepped on the zombie dog's body and suddenly swung down with her claws. As soon as she waved her hand, she revealed herself. From the battle just now, Lin Xiao could see that the magic tree was immune to magic attacks, and only physical attacks were effective against it. Because the zombie dog's ability fire was useless against it, using her claws to cut off a few branches. Therefore, Lin Xiao immediately decided to use her claws to cut it. Sensing Lin Xiao's sudden appearance, the magic tree panicked. Because Lin Xiao's aura was too dangerous to the magic tree, and her position just happened to be where the magic tree's life gate was wide open. Moreover, as soon as Lin Xiao appeared, her attack also followed. But after her claws swung down, her figure immediately flashed and disappeared from the zombie dog's body. Puff, 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 but as soon as she disappeared, a few strange sounds came from the magic tree's body. Then, the entire magic tree suddenly stopped moving. As for the zombie dog, when it was originally bound by the magic tree, it sensed danger and immediately became clear-headed. Therefore, when the magic tree sent it to the middle position, it kept struggling and twisting. Now that the magic tree was completely still, only the zombie dog was still moving. As a result, when it moved, it suddenly fell out of the branches. The branches that were originally wrapped around it seemed like a switch was turned off, and all of them loosened up. Then it softly fell to the ground. Putong, the zombie dog fell to the ground and stood up from the ground in a daze. Then it looked at the mutated magic tree inexplicably. But soon, its expression became vigilant again. It slightly lowered its front limbs and pressed down on its 2 ears. A pair of fierce zombie beast eyes stared at the surroundings. Lin Xiao dodged, somersaulted in midair, and then steadily landed on the ground. Roar, roar! The zombie dog immediately locked its gaze on her, and then it pressed its head down with its teeth. Chapter 337. Roar dash. At this time, the zombie dog didn't take advantage of this time to leave. Instead, when it saw Lin Xiao walking towards the magic tree, it went berserk. With a fierce roar, it stomped its 4 legs and rushed towards Lin Xiao. Then, it jumped up high and pounced towards Lin Xiao with its claws. Lin Xiao turned around and casually swung her arm. Bang dash, the huge dog that weighed a few 100 kilograms was swatted away like a fly. Stand properly. Don't move. Lin Xiao pointed at it and shouted loudly. Roar dash, the zombie dog that got up didn't listen to her at all and rushed over again. It continued to pounce on her. Lin Xiao turned around again and directly waved her other hand. Pot dash, another slap, and the zombie dog was swatted back. But this time, after Lin Xiao slapped it back, she didn't continue to stand in place. Instead, she instantly rushed over. When the zombie dog fell to the ground with a bang, she suddenly jumped onto the dog's neck and forcefully waved her fist. I told you to stand properly, but you didn't listen? You're a zombie, and you're not afraid of being beaten, right? See if I don't beat you to death, you stupid dog. As she spoke, she began to use her fist to hit the zombie dog's head. Bang, 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 dash, roar, dash. The zombie dog's head was almost buried in the ground from her continuous hits. Lin Xiao didn't use much strength to hit it, so it couldn't break its head. At most, it would be knocked into the ground. Whoa. The zombie dog's voice became weaker. Only then did Lin Xiao stop and stand up from its body. She didn't care that her pants were stained with the zombie dog's blood and pointed at it and shouted again. Don't move. Roar. After shouting, she also roared at it. This last warning roar successfully calmed the zombie dog down. Lin Xiao then turned around and continued to walk towards the magic tree while covering her nose. When she saw the black and smelly liquid flowing on the ground, she stopped in her tracks. Then he looked left and right before picking up a tree branch. The originally soft and movable branch of the magic tree had now become a dry and hard branch. Lin Xiao took the branch and stepped on the tree trunk beside him. Then he used the branch to rummage through the pile of animal bones. When she flipped the bones to one side, she saw an energy core embedded in the middle of the tree trunk. Lin Xiao waved his claws at the location of the energy core a few times, and the tree trunk was cut into pieces. She continued to use the branch to rummage through the pile of wooden blocks. Soon, she found the one with the energy core. Then he used the branch to pick it out. When he picked out the energy core from the pile of dirty liquid, Lin Xiao suddenly had a glass of water in his hand and poured it on the energy core. After washing the energy core with water, Lin Xiao bent down to pick up the wooden block of the energy core. Lin Xiao looked at the sphere that looked like a lump on a tree trunk. It was a little smaller than her fist. However, she could feel a strange energy in her hand. She was about to take it into the space to ask Little Man if she wanted it when she saw the zombie dog quietly crawl up. It lay on the ground and quietly moved its 4 legs like a turtle, crawling into the forest bit by bit. Where do you want to go? Lin Xiao looked at its movements and suddenly asked. Following Lin Xiao's voice, the zombie dog's crawling movement froze. Then, it turned its head and meowed pitifully at Lin Xiao. Whoa! Lin Xiao walked over and bent down to grab the dirty and sticky fur on its neck. Then she directly flashed and brought it into the space. After entering the space, Lin Xiao threw it to the side with a plop. Don't move! Lin Xiao saw that it was ready to roll and escape as soon as it landed on the ground, and immediately shouted at it. After being shouted at by her, the zombie dog immediately became obedient. At this time, Lin Xiao didn't need to shout at the lake. A few thick jade white vines had already emerged from the lake. He reached out towards her. To be precise, they were coming towards the piece of wood in her hand. Lin Xiao directly waved her hand and threw the wood towards her. Little Man immediately caught it accurately, then curled it up and shrunk into the water. But she still stretched out a long vine and wrapped it around Lin Xiao's hand. Mama, 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 this is good, this is good. This energy smells so good. Lin Xiao thought of the bones and dirty water outside and the pungent stench. She really didn't know what smelled good. Do you know what level the energy core of this tree is? Little Man said. Level 4. Lin Xiao nodded and pointed to the dog lying on the ground beside her and said, No wonder this thing is already level 5, but still can't beat a tree. Mutated plants or animals have always been stronger than zombies or psychics. Because their oddities are different from the normal rules, they're considered an anomaly. It is hard to imagine whether their energy or skills are strong or weak. They are very strong when they are strong, but they are also very weak when they are weak. But it is reasonable to say that zombie dogs are generally more aggressive than normal zombies. And this is a level 5 zombie dog. Its attack power and reaction speed are quite close to a level 6 zombie king. It can't even kill a tree. How did the zombie dog become so weak? Lin Xiao thought, and suddenly stared at the zombie dog curiously. Little Man, who was wrapped around her hand, sensed her thoughts and said to her, Mama, mama, this zombie dog only has claws that can attack this kind of mutated tree. Its fire ability is useless against this kind of mutated tree that can absorb energy. Lin Xiao turned her head to look at Little Man in surprise. How do you know this dog's ability is fire? And you also know the characteristics of the tree. Little Man said with a bit of pride. As long as I enter this space, Little Man can distinguish all the types of abilities. Lin Xiao understood and said, so that's how it is. Little Man said, Mama. This time Little Man may take a bit longer to absorb. Mama must be prepared after Little Man finishes absorbing. Then I will repair your stomach. Lin Xiao subconsciously touched her stomach. She was also very curious about what it looked like inside, but she didn't dare to cut open her stomach. What if she ruined Little Man's previous recovery? She nodded and said, okay, I will wait for you. Little Man said happily. With this mutated tree's energy core, Mama and Little Man will become different. Wait for Little Man's good news. Lin Xiao heard what she said. It seemed that after she finished absorbing, there would be a very different change. Okay, I will wait for your good news. Little Man let go of her and then shrunk back into the lake. Lin Xiao watched Little Man disappear into the lake, then turned her head to look at the zombie dog that has been curled up on the ground since Little Man came out. She stared at the zombie dog left and right. So ugly. So disgusting. Chapter 338. The zombie dog's appearance was really ugly. The fur all over his body was cracked, and there was a lot of dirty black blood on it, so it looked like a bunch of puffs. The skin on the corner of its mouth was also cracked, and flesh could be seen inside. Its white teeth were sharp and long, very scary. Lin Xiao squatted beside it and said to it, look at you, so ugly. Even if I take you in, it's not good to take you out to see people. What if you scare the children? Roar Dash, the zombie dog, turned its head and roared at her, but it didn't dare to really rush at Lin Xiao. Instead, it was timid, crawling back. At this moment, a long object was suddenly thrown out of the lake. Lin Xiao reached out and caught it. It was a vine as thick as a thumb, about 4 to 5 meters long, and it was jade white. As soon as she caught the vine, Lin Xiao immediately understood Little Man's intention. It was for her to use as a dog leash. Come here. Looking at the zombie dog that was moving back a few meters, Lin Xiao shouted to it. Roar Dash, the zombie dog, protested and refused to go over. Instead, it was ready to turn around and run. If you dare run, I'll throw you into the lake when I catch you. I'm telling you. Lin Xiao scolded it. Awa Dash, the zombie dog that had just run 2 steps, suddenly stopped. Lin Xiao tightened the rattan in his hand and said to it, where do you think you can run in here? Huh? Roar Dash, the zombie dog, turned back and roared at her, then ran towards the direction of the forest. Lin Xiao threw the vine in her hand on the ground like a whip. Then her figure flashed, and she chased after the zombie dog. Lin Xiao could clearly sense where the zombie dog was and where it was running towards. So Lin Xiao took a shortcut from the side and went in front of it to intercept it. Because of the actions of Lin Xiao and the zombie dog, Shun Yuzhen, who was originally sitting on the sofa, hid behind the sofa. She looked in the direction of the forest with a frightened face. She was already a little afraid of Lin Xiao's aura, but now the zombie dog's aura was even more frightening. Because Lin Xiao's other people's auras were all hidden, this zombie dog's aura was completely released. Moreover, it carried a savage wildness, like a ferocious predator. On the other side, when the zombie dog rushed into the forest, it suddenly saw Lin Xiao jump down from the tree in front of it. Then, the white rattan in her hand wrapped around him. Lin Xiao tied a loop at the front of the rattan and jumped down when the zombie dog ran to her side of the tree. She put the loop on the zombie dog's head. By the time the zombie dog reacted, it had already been strangled. Roar! Lin Xiao jumped down from above and pulled the other end of the rope tightly. Then he tied the rope to a nearby tree. Stay still, or I'll really throw you into the lake. Roar, roar, roar. The zombie dog was tied to the tree by her. It pulled on the vines of the small vine while roaring and struggling. After Lin Xiao said that, he turned around and walked out. She left the zombie dog to struggle on its own. After leaving the forest, she saw Shun Yuzhen and stopped to ask, do you want to go out with me now? I'm already on the way back to Haicheng. There's still more than an hour's drive. Xin Yuzhen looked worriedly in the direction of the forest and then shook her head at Lin Xiao. She lowered her head with a lonely expression, not knowing what to think. Lin Xiao looked at her and didn't force it. She just nodded and said, "Okay." After leaving the space, Lin Xiao looked at the time. It was almost dark. She let the car out and continued to drive to Haicheng. At this time in Haicheng, Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying were still staying in their original house. Yuan Tianxing and the others were still opposite them. Li Zheng's team had already followed Lin Feng to Hangzhou. Only Du Yuanxing, Lu Junjie, and a few other soldiers with no abilities were left here. At this time, Yuan Tianxing and the others were in Lin Wenwen's house. The few of them were leisurely sitting on the sofa in the house. Some were cleaning their guns, some were playing cards, and some were reading. Some were sitting by the window and observing the outside. Lin Wenwen was busy in the kitchen, and Long Qingying helped her bring out plate after plate of dishes. "It's time to eat. Come over." After Long Qingying brought out the last bowl of soup, she raised her head and called out to the others expressionlessly. The men in the living room immediately moved to the dining table and the kitchen. They washed their hands and sat down. They took the bowls to the pot and scooped the rice. "Do you think Miss Lu and the others are coming back soon?" Du Yuanxing bit his chopsticks and turned to look at the dim light outside the window. He suddenly said. Lin Wenwen looked outside and said, "If they're coming back, they should be arriving at the base soon. But Sister Lu's whereabouts have always been elusive. Maybe she's already here. She just hasn't appeared yet." Long Qingying nodded and said, "I agree." Yuan Tianxing looked at Lin Wenwen and asked in confusion, "Why don't you go with them? It's not safe for you two girls to stay in the base. You shouldn't go out often during the day. Let us men handle the recruitment." Lin Wenwen looked up at him and then nodded. Then she said, "I know. I just want to help you." After saying that, she looked away and lowered her head to eat. If this person hadn't suddenly disappeared for more than a month, she wouldn't have wanted to stay by his side so willfully. The fear and worry of losing him was a suffocating torment for her. She didn't want to bear this feeling anymore, so she wanted to stay by his side even if it was dangerous. Even though she knew that she was being willful, she was about to lose control of her heart. Yuan Tianxing was suddenly speechless under her gaze. He turned his head and saw that the others were all looking at him silently, with ambiguous smiles on their faces. "What are you looking at? Hurry up and eat," Yuan Tianxing said to them, amused. The others immediately lowered their heads and started eating. "Deputy leader, hurry up and find a wife." At this time, Long Qingying, who happened to come over with the food, suddenly said lightly, "Puffed." Du Yuan and the others immediately looked at her. Yuan Tianxing looked at Long Qingying blankly and said, "It's very difficult to find a wife." Long Qingying sat down and glanced at him indifferently. She raised her chopsticks and pointed at Lin Wenwen. "What's difficult about it? There's one right in front of you. You can't even fish up the moon because you're so close to the water. Don't you know that there are people lining up by the water?" Lin Wenwen, who was being pointed at with chopsticks, raised her chopsticks awkwardly and hid her away. "Qingqing, what nonsense are you talking about?" Long Qingying turned around and rolled her eyes. "How am I talking nonsense? What do you guys think?" As she said that, she looked at Du Yuanxing and the others. Cough that actually, Qingqing is right. Deputy leader, you can also consider our Miss Wenwen. Du Yuanxing's eyes turned and suddenly said. Lu Junjie and the others just looked at Yuan Tianxing silently and held their bowls at the same time and nodded. Yuan Tianxing glanced at them. "Wenwen is single now. You guys also have a chance." As soon as he said that, the others immediately shut up. They all buried their heads in eating. Chapter 339. On the other side of Wu Qingyue's house, Mengyu was sitting at the table, eating the rice in her bowl. Her expression was slightly hesitant. Then she suddenly raised her eyes and looked at Wu Qingyue, who was watching Wu Yueling eat. Why did you ask someone to find a pair of cosmetic lenses for that zombie?" Wu Qingyue heard her words and looked back at her. "What's wrong? I just see her wearing sunglasses every day. It's too suspicious. Why don't you ask someone to find a pair of cosmetic lenses for her? Meng Yu's expression froze for a moment. An inexplicable light flashed in her eyes. She slightly closed her eyes and moved the chopsticks in her hand. Is it because she helped Ling Ling through the awakening? Wu Qingyue nodded and said, yes, that's right. Although I think giving her this as a thank you gift might be a little too light, but I think she will like it. Meng Yu paused for a moment, then smiled and said, yes, it's indeed too light. It's not the first time she's saved Ling Ling, but you don't seem to have repaid her. Why don't you marry her? Her last sentence sounded like a joke, so Wu Qingyue just smiled and looked at her. Do you want me to feed the zombies? Then Wu Qingyue looked at Wu Yueling, who was eating the chopsticks, and said, besides, I also want to find a mother for her. But I'm afraid that I will make a mistake and hurt her. Wu Yueling was still not very good with the chopsticks, but she could already eat by herself. Her movements were very clumsy, but she looked very cute. She didn't pay much attention to the conversation between the two adults, but after hearing Wu Qingyue say that he wanted to find a mother for her, she suddenly stopped. Then a light flashed in her big eyes. But she quickly lowered her head and continued to eat, but the light in her eyes was getting brighter and brighter. Meng Yu heard Wu Qingyue's words and felt relieved. She looked at Wu Qingyue and said, actually, if Ling Ling is not your biological daughter, you can have another one. Wu Qingyue shook his head and said, what does this have to do with whether she is biological or not? Even if Ling Ling doesn't have my blood, I still love her. She also loves me as a father. Meng Yu looked at him in silence. Wu Yueling finished the food in her bowl, put down her chopsticks, and looked up at Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue smiled at her and said, are you full? When you're full, wipe your mouth first, understand? Wu Yueling picked up the napkin on the table and wiped her mouth. Then, she jumped off the chair. He trotted towards the living room. You can't run so fast after eating. You'll get a stomachache. Wu Qingyue shouted at her. Wu Yueling immediately stopped and looked back at him. Only then did he walk over. She walked to the sofa and picked up the gray rabbit that had curled up into a ball. She placed it on her short legs and used her small hands to stroke the soft fur on its back. The gray rabbit curled up on her leg and didn't move. It seemed to be enjoying being petted by her. Wu Yueling looked at Wu Qingyue while stroking the gray rabbit, thinking about what he had just said. Was Daddy going to find her a mother? But Ling Ling didn't want anyone else to be Ling Ling's mother. Ling Ling only wanted her father. What the hell is a mother? Is it edible? But if I can get the zombie's sister to be with Daddy, it doesn't seem like a bad idea. He didn't know if Little Man would agree or not. I really want to play with Little Man. When will the zombie sister come to see Ling Ling? Wu Yueling's brain had already turned a few corners. On the other side, Wu Qingyue still didn't know that his words had attracted the attention of a child. Seeing that Wu Yueling had run to the sofa to play with the rabbit, Wu Qingyue began to eat. After eating, Wu Qingyue and Meng Yu sat on the sofa and talked business. You have to keep an eye on Yang Chao. Also, remind Big Tree and Mo Li to pay attention to the movements of the Research Institute. Meng Yu nodded and said, we still haven't found the whereabouts of the robber who secretly cooperated with Yang Chao. Do you think he has already infiltrated the base? Wu Qingyue nodded in agreement and said, it's possible. His original target was Lin Feng and the others, but Lin Feng and the others arrived at our base safely. I think the robber definitely won't give up. It's possible that Yang Chao let him in, and we don't know if he is still in the base, or if he followed Lin Feng and the others out today. Speaking up to this point, he paused and said, but there's that female zombie. Even if the robber is a level 7 psychic, he shouldn't be able to get away with it. Meng Yu asked curiously, why? Could it be that this Miss Liu is already above level 6? But I don't feel that her power is that strong. Wu Qingyue shook his head and said, it's not her. It's the other people with her. Or other zombies? He didn't say the last sentence. Ever since the last time this Miss Liu took off her sunglasses and let him see her eyes, Wu Qingyue always felt that the exquisite face seemed a little familiar. Where did he see it before? But in this post-apocalyptic world, women were already rare. Such a beautiful woman. Even if he had seen her before, he wouldn't forget her. And on that beautiful face, there was a pair of dark eyes without any white. If he hadn't interacted with her before, perhaps he would feel that her appearance was very strange and scary. But Wu Qingyue didn't know why, but he felt that it was very novel. After he saw that pair of eyes that day, he seemed to see green pupils in them. It didn't look beautiful at all, but it gave people a feeling that they wanted to see it again. Meng Yu asked curiously, "There's something else? Or are you talking about zombies?" Wu Qingyue looked at her, didn't shake his head or nod. He said, "I just feel that there's an even more powerful energy in her body." Meng Yu nodded and said, "I also feel that it's indeed different from Miss Lu's own energy." Wu Qingyue said, "Yun Long should be back tonight. Tomorrow, you stay in the base with him. I'll lead the team out alone." His words made Meng Yu stunned. "You want to go out alone? Why? Aren't we all together?" In the past, almost every time he went out of the base, he would take her with him. Why did he leave her behind this time? Wu Qingyue said, "Recently, Yang Chao's hands and feet have been a little restless. I want you two to stay here to look after the base. Zhou Shihui doesn't care, and I'm afraid that Yang Chao will take action when I'm not in the base." Meng Yu looked up at him and opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Wu Qingyue interrupted her. "Yu, this is an order." Wu Qingyue looked at her with a faint smile and said, Yu, this is an order." His eyes were still smiling as usual, but there was a bit more sternness and irresistible in them. Meng Yu felt an inexplicable grievance in her heart, but she still nodded. This man had never put her on the same level as him. Chapter 340. When Lin Xiao arrived near the base, it was already 8 or 9 o'clock in the evening. She stopped the car at a distance where the base guards couldn't hear the sound of the car. Then she put the car into the space. Then she walked towards the base. The gate of the base was closed at night. Lin Xiao clawed at the wall with her claws and climbed up stealthily. Then she climbed to the top of the wall and jumped down into the base. There were many dark places in the base at night, and no light could reach them. Only in the inner area would there be street lights. The lights in the outer area were concentrated in the residential buildings, and the electricity in other places was cut off. Therefore, people living in the base would not go out at night if there was nothing important. Lin Xiao walked along the dark road and headed for Area D. When she was 1 kilometer away from Lin Wenwen's community, she smelled several scents. These unusual smells stopped her in her tracks. Lin Xiao found a dark corner and released Xin Yuzhen. She pointed in a direction and said, "The person you're looking for is over there. Right now, your night vision is no different from your daytime vision. You also have to learn to analyze the smell of each person. Control your hunger and don't hurt innocent people." Xin Yuzhen nodded and looked in the direction Lin Xiao pointed. She suddenly sniffed with her nose, and there was a familiar and disgusting smell of smoke drifting from afar. Her eyes immediately widened, and her lips began to crack, revealing her teeth. Lin Xiao said, "Go. Be careful not to expose yourself. You'll be fine as long as you don't talk." Xin Yuzhen nodded and turned to leave. Lin Xiao followed her invisibly because she told Xin Yuzhen to go. She also went in the direction of Lin Wenwen's community. She didn't follow very closely. She looked at the surrounding buildings. Then, like a monkey, he climbed up the wall in a few steps. Standing on the roof, she watched Xin Yuzhen walk through the dark alley next to her, or hide when she found someone passing by in advance. When the person left, she continued to come out and quietly walked forward. At this time, outside the community where Lin Wenwen lived, 2 groups of people met at an intersection. "Deputy Leader Pu, why are you here so late at night?" Lu Tianyi stood on one side of the road and asked Pu Xuetzong, who was standing across from him. Beside him were Kong Qingming, Huang Shou, Lu Jing, and a few others. On the other hand, Pu Xuetzong, who was standing opposite them, had his hands in his pockets as he sized up Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming from head to toe. He smiled and said, "Yo, aren't these the 2 chrysanthemums from Leader Zhou's side? I also want to ask you, what are you doing here in the middle of the night? Could it be that there was something shameful? Is that why you came here in the dark?" Both his tone and the smile on his face carried a hint of malicious sarcasm. There were even some evil desires surging within. Pure chrysanthemums, of course, referred to the two of them who were virtuous chrysanthemums, because the men in the base who coveted their androgynous beauty gave them this name after they couldn't get their hands on them. Lu Tianyi just smiled faintly. His smile was very elegant, and he didn't look angry. Deputy Leader Park, if there's nothing else, please go back. This is the guest area of Special A, and it's not good for you, a deputy leader of Area B, to appear in someone else's territory. Kong Qingming, who was standing next to him, also had a smile on his face. However, Kong Qingming's smile had always been a little evil, and when matched with his beautiful face, it had a strong and seductive charm. They didn't react to the way Pu Xuezong addressed them. They maintained their original expressions as if they hadn't heard it. However, Huang Bao and the others behind them had already changed their expressions. They stared at Pu Xuezong and the others with gloomy faces. Pu Xuezong just smiled faintly at Lu Tianyi's words and said, "I'd like to ask you, what qualifications do you have to talk about me here? Even if I'm not your direct superior, I'm still a deputy leader. Before you speak, watch your tone." Lu Tianyi didn't care about his warning at all. He smiled faintly and said, "This is Area D. Neither you nor I have the qualifications. I was just advising you out of goodwill. You, a deputy leader of Area B, came to the guest area of Special A at night for no reason. I don't know if you've gotten Leader Wu's permission. If he knows you're here, he might misunderstand something. Besides, I'm here with Leader Zhou's order and Leader Wu's permission. We came here on the orders of our Leader Zhou and with the approval of Leader Wu." He looked at him coldly and said, "It's none of your business that I'm here. I advise you not to meddle in other people's business." Suddenly, footsteps came from the side of the road, and then a figure appeared. Because the light in the residential area couldn't reach this side, the people present could only see the silhouette of a woman. Suddenly, they picked up the flashlights they brought with them and shone them over. They saw a woman with long hair walking slowly toward them. They picked up the flashlights they brought with them and shone them over. They saw a long-haired woman slowly walking towards them. Lu Tianyi and the others looked at the woman strangely. It was already late at night, and normal people rarely came out to exercise. Not to mention a woman who came out alone. This was too unreasonable. When Pu Xuezong saw the woman's face clearly, his expression changed. He suddenly tilted his head and asked the person next to him in a low voice, "Why is she here? Wasn't this woman locked in the room in Area F?" The expressions of the people behind him also became solemn as they stared at the woman walking toward them. Shen Yuzhen walked over slowly. Her face under her disheveled hair stared at Pu Xuezong expressionlessly. "What are you standing there for? Hurry up and take her away." Seeing that Shen Yuzhen was less than 3 meters away from them, Pu Xuezong shouted at the person next to him. His subordinates immediately walked out and were about to surround Shen Yuzhen and capture her. "Wait a minute. What do you want?" Lu Tianyi suddenly shouted at Pu Xuezong. He immediately took a few steps forward and stood between them and Shen Yuzhen, stopping them from moving. "Who are you? Why are you still out so late at night? Hurry up and go back." Kong Qingming also came over, then turned his head and said to Shen Yuzhen. Shen Yuzhen smelled the fragrance of Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming, and the hunger in her stomach began to churn. She hurriedly took 2 steps back and slightly distanced herself from them. She shook her head, then raised her hand and pointed at Pu Xuezong. A strong hatred flashed in her eyes. Kong Qingming sensed the surging aura on her body. Of course, he could also see her hatred for Pu Xuezong from her eyes. Suddenly, he somewhat understood what this woman was here for. He turned his head and said to Pu Xuezong, "Did you do something to her?" Chapter 341. You must have done something to her. She's obviously here to make trouble for you. Kong Qingming turned around and said to Pu Xuezong. Lu Tianyi looked at Shen Yuzhen and then turned back to stare at Pu Xuezong. The smile on his face had disappeared, and he said to Pu Xuezong with a stern expression, "Deputy Leader Pu, you'll run in a ghost if you walk too much at night. Have you ever thought that one day someone will come to take revenge on you for what you've done behind the scenes?" They all knew that Pujitsong was not a good person to begin with. He especially liked to play with other people's women behind the scenes, and it was a compulsive act. After playing with those women, he could never find them again. Many people suspected and hated him, but there was nothing they could do about him. That was because he only picked ordinary people or ability users with low status. If they were found out later, he would send people to kill them, and so on. Now, a woman was standing in front of him, staring at him with hatred. He must have done something to her. And just now, Pujitsong wanted to arrest her in front of him. Hearing Lu Tiany's words, Pujitsong's eyes flashed with a faint killing intent. He suddenly laughed and said, "Minister Lu, I don't understand what you're talking about. This woman is a dangerous person. To prevent her from harming other people in the base, you'd better hand her over to me." Saying that, he raised his hand and crooked his finger at his men behind him. The few people who had been stopped by Lu Tiany immediately leaned toward Shun Yuzhen again. Lu Tiany saw that Pujitsong dared to brazenly arrest people as if they didn't exist. His face darkened. Just as he was about to speak, a hand suddenly stopped him from behind. Lu Tiany looked back and saw Shun Yuzhen shaking her head at him with gratitude. Then she walked past him toward Pujitsong. "Don't go over there. It's dangerous." "What do you want?" Lu Tiany and Kong Qingming both shouted at her. But because of Shun Yuzhen's current attitude, they didn't stop her again. First, they respected her. Second, they were curious about what this woman would do to Pujitsong. Moreover, they would be watching closely from the side, ready to make a move. Even if he couldn't defeat the level 6 Pujitsong, he couldn't just watch as he was taken away. Seeing that Shun Yuzhen didn't run away in fear when she saw him, and even ran directly to him, Pujitsong felt a little strange. Now, seeing that she insisted on walking toward him, out of curiosity, Pu Rukang suddenly raised his hand and gestured for his subordinates to stop. Then, he waited for Shun Yuzhen to walk up to him. Shun Yuzhen walked in front of him, and several people shone their flashlights directly into her eyes. However, she stared at Pu Quokang without blinking. "What do you want? Although I don't know how you ran out, I didn't expect you to not return to your home, but to come to me like an idiot. I really don't know what's going on in your head." Roar, just as Pujitsong was about to say something to Shun Yuzhen, before he could finish his sentence, all of a sudden, Shun Yuzhen roared at him with a ferocious look on her face. At the same time, she pounced at Pujitsong and bit him. However, Pu Rukang was still a rank 6 ability user, so his reaction was still very agile. However, when Shun Yuzhen pounced at him, he was too close to her. It was already too late for him to dodge, so he subconsciously raised his arm and swung it at Shun Yuzhen's wide, open mouth. Roar! When Shun Yuzhen was swung away, she bit off a piece of flesh from his arm. Then, she fell to the side and got up with a mouth full of blood. Munch, munch, Shun Yuzhen chewed on the piece of flesh in her mouth while her mouth was full of blood. Then, she spat out the cloth in her mouth. After being pounced on and bitten by her, she still looked like she was eating human flesh. The others were stunned for a moment. "What are you still looking at? Blow her head off." Pujitsong, who had been bitten off and was in so much pain that his entire face twitched, roared angrily. Only then did his subordinates suddenly react. They subconsciously took out their guns and started shooting at Shun Yuzhen. Bang, bang, bang. A series of gunshots immediately rang out in the dark night. The sudden gunshots immediately attracted the attention of the people in the community. The sudden sound of gunfire immediately attracted the attention of the people in the community. Roar! When they started shooting, Shun Yuzhen suddenly dodged and rushed into the flower bed at the side. Roar! When they started fighting, Shun Yuzhen suddenly dodged and rushed into the flower bed at the side. It moved very fast, like an animal hunting in the night. "Don't let her escape. She has become a zombie. We can't let her run around in the base." Pujitsong covered his arm with a pained expression. After saying this, he suddenly noticed the wound on his hand. Pu Qiakang covered his arm with a pained expression. After he finished speaking, he suddenly noticed the wound on his arm. You're right. He didn't expect that this woman had become a zombie. The way this woman pounced on him and her twisted face were no different from a zombie. The way this woman pounced on him and her twisted face were no different from a zombie. Puchitsang originally only wanted to inquire about the two women from the Netherworld King's base. He didn't expect to meet Zhou Shihui's people before he even reached the place. Moreover, the woman he had caught 2 days ago to torture ran out. Now this woman seemed to have become a zombie. She actually went crazy and bit him. Now, the wound on his hand must have been infected by the zombie virus. No, he had to go to the hospital. No, he had to go to the research institute. Those useless people in the hospital had no way to deal with the zombie virus. Only the research institute had a way. At this time, Puchitsang was already frightened by the fact that he was infected with the zombie virus. Now, all he could think of was how to prevent himself from becoming a zombie. Seeing that his subordinates were chasing after the woman, he quickly turned around and ran to the research institute. Thus, Lu Tianyi, Kong Qingming, and the others were left behind. Fuck, what happened just now? Huang Shou looked like he had seen a ghost. Who knows? The others also looked like they had seen a ghost. They actually saw a zombie in the base. What did this mean? It meant that zombies had sneaked in. It meant that the base might not be safe from now on. Why didn't she attack us? And her target seems to be only the one surnamed Pu. Lu Tianyi suddenly murmured. When the others heard his question, they were immediately stunned. Because she's only here for revenge. She won't harm people. Suddenly, a hoarse voice sounded from the side. Lu Tianyi and the others were shocked and immediately looked in the direction of the voice. At the same time, the flashlights in their hands shone over. It was a woman wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap in the middle of the night. She stood there with a suspicious look, looking at them with the corner of her mouth. Huh? It's your sister. Kong Qingming immediately turned his head and said to Lu Tianyi in surprise when he saw the woman. Chapter 342. A hint of joy flashed through Lu Tianyi's eyes, but he didn't show it. He turned to Kong Qingming and said, "Don't talk nonsense in the base. After all, if her identity was exposed in the base, it would be troublesome." Kong Qingming rolled his eyes. "Yes, got it." Lu Tianyi turned his head and looked at Lin Xiao. "It's really you? I thought Leader Wu had found someone else." Lin Xiao glanced at him and asked, "Why are you here? Why are you here so late?" Lu Tianyi said, "Our leader received news that Yang Chao would do something to the people in the Netherworld King's base, and then push the blame to Leader Wu. We are here to inform the people of the Netherworld King's base." Lin Xiao turned his head to look in the direction that Xun Yuzhen had escaped and sensed the situation on her side. Under the cover of the night, she seemed to be in no danger. She turned around and said to Lu Tianyi, "You go up and find them first. I'll leave first. There's still one problem we haven't solved." As she spoke, she raised her head and glanced in the direction of Yuan Tianxing's neighborhood. Suddenly, she disappeared in front of them. Lu Tianyi, Kong Qingming, and the others looked at each other. "What other troubles are there?" Kong Qingming shook his head and said, "I'm not sure. Let's go look for him first. It's getting late. The sooner we finish this, the sooner we can go back." As he spoke, he suddenly looked at Lu Tianyi with disdain and said, "You were the one who asked me to secretly pay attention to the situation here, but you actually pushed all the blame to our leader. Aren't you ashamed?" Lu Tianyi glanced at him with a smile, then turned his head to look around and nodded. As he walked towards the neighborhood, he said, "If I don't push the blame onto the leader, wouldn't my motives be a little suspicious? Could it be that she had brought that woman in? It seems like he really turned into a zombie. I wonder what will happen to him." Kong Qingming shrugged and said, "Who knows? If he turns into a zombie, that would be even better. Just blow his head off." At this time, Huang Shou asked, That female zombie staying in the base, isn't that bad? Does she bite?" Lu Tianyi didn't care and said, "No, she brought in zombies. I don't think it will bite anyone. You saw it just now. We are in front of her. She's like a normal person. He was only targeting Pu. It will be fun if that park guy turns into a zombie." Huang Shou asked, "Don't we need to follow that park guy to check on him?" Kong Qingming smiled and said, "There's no need. Anyway, The direction he left just now must be to the Research Institute. That's their territory. It's more fun to let them mess up. Don't worry, said Lu Tianyi. I don't think he can escape even if he goes to the Research Institute. There are also Leader Wu's men over there. This will give Leader Wu a reason, right? Huang Shou and the others looked at each other and said, so this has nothing to do with us. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming nodded. After Lin Xiao entered the residential area, he turned around and walked toward a residential building at the edge. Then he climbed up from the balcony and other places until he reached the top of the building. She stood at the edge of the corner of the building and looked at a figure standing on the roof of the stairwell. This person actually managed to sneak in. Sure enough, Yang Chao's actions weren't considered slow. It was just that he didn't know who this bandit leader was going to target by coming here to keep an eye on them. Lin Xiao didn't know who Tang He's target was. At this time, Tang He also didn't know that someone was already watching him from behind. He looked at the place where Pu Xuezong and Lu Tianyi and the others were just now, his face gloomy. That trash! Tang He frowned and cursed. Then he turned around and prepared to leave. But as soon as he turned around, his expression suddenly froze. Then he stared around and scanned. He didn't find anything suspicious, so he wondered if he was thinking too much just now. Tang He turned around and directly jumped down from the building. A transparent figure also jumped down with him. Before Lin Xiao jumped down, she turned her head and looked in the direction of Lin Wenwen's house. Suddenly, she was glad that she had come back in time. It was really great. Something almost happened here. And she glanced at Lu Tianyi and the others. Did this guy think she didn't know what he was thinking? On the other side, Lu Tianyi and the others entered Yuan Tianxing's residential area. After climbing up the stairs, they walked to the door of Yuan Tianxing's house. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming knocked on the door on both sides. As soon as Long Qingying opened the door, she saw a gorgeous. She glanced down from the other person's face and then confirmed that it wasn't a woman. Well, a gorgeous man. What's the matter? Kong Qingming, whose gender was confirmed by a woman with sharp eyes by looking at his chest, was speechless. There was a little naughty smile on his face, and it hung a little stiffly on his face. But soon, his unnaturalness disappeared. Maintaining his smile, he asked, "Is Miss Lin Wenwen here?" Long Qingying glanced at the others outside the door without moving. Then, she continued to stare at him and asked, "Who are you? Why are you looking for Wenwen?" Kong Qingming felt uncomfortable being stared at by her laser-like eyes. Suddenly, he took 2 steps back and raised his hand behind him. He pulled Lu Tianyi, who had just knocked on the opposite door, over. "Will you come over here?" Lu Tianyi, who was suddenly pulled over, had a puzzled look on his face. He looked at Long Qingying in confusion, then turned his head to look at Kong Qingming, who was smiling a little strangely. Then, he looked at the others and asked them with his eyes. What was going on? Huang Shou and the other 2 shrugged and shook their heads at the same time. Kong Qingming stood in front of Yuan Tianxing's door and looked back at Long Qingying. Then he turned his head away, showing the back of his head to the others. Coincidentally, Yuan Tianxing's door opened at this time, and Du Yuanxing stuck his head out. In the end, they saw a few strangers standing outside the door. Not only did the door open on their side, not only did the door to Lin Wenwen's room open too. What's wrong? What's the matter? You are? Long Qingying saw that these people were behaving strangely, and she immediately wanted to close the door with a cold expression. Hey, please wait. We came with news about you guys, and we want to tell you. Of course, if you don't want to hear it, then we can leave now. Lu Tianyi reacted quickly and stopped Long Qingying in time. About us? Lin Wenwen's voice came from inside. She walked behind Long Qingying and looked outside curiously. Just then, she heard Lu Tianyi say this. Long Qingying looked back at her, then looked at Lu Tianyi and the others suspiciously. At this time, Yuan Tianxing walked out from behind Du Yuanxing, looked at Lu Tianyi and the others, and asked, "You are?" "I'm Lu Tianyi, the head of the 3rd Department of Agriculture in this base. This is my ID. Don't worry, we're not here to cause trouble." Lu Tianyi took out his work ID and showed it to Yuan Tianxing. Chapter 343. Yuan Tianqing looked at them, then invited them into his room and said, "Please come in and sit down." After opening the door for Lu Tianyi and the others to go in, Yuan Tianqing shouted to Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying, "You two come and see what's going on." "Oh." Lin Wenwen looked at Yuan Tianqing and nodded. Then she looked at Long Qingying and said, "Let's go." When it came to Yuan Tianqing's side, Kong Qingming and Lu Tianyi sat on the sofa. Yuan Tianqing and Lin Wenwen, the two girls, were also sitting. Only the others found a place to stand or leaned against the wall. "What's the news you're talking about?" Yuan Tianqing looked at Lu Tianyi and Long Qingying and asked. Lu Tianyi said, "In fact, we met some people outside the community, but they left because of us or some other reason. But I'm sure they're here for the two girls." Yuan Tianqing and the others looked at each other. Only Long Qingying asked coldly, "You've been here for a long time. What exactly do you want to say? Can you get to the point?" Lin Wenwen nodded and said, "You said those people just came for us. Who are they? Why are they coming for us? Did we offend them? Or do they have other intentions?" Lu Tianyi looked at her and said, "Leader Wu asked us to bring the news. Because he wants to destroy the cooperation between you and Leader Wu. Yang Chao secretly wants to send people to take you two girls away, and Yang Chao's people took action tonight. Leader Wu doesn't have enough people now, so we came here to do something. So we brought the news for him." Kong Qingming said, "As for whether you offended Yang Chao or not, I don't know. But you offended his sister, Yang Yin, and many people should know about this. I heard that Yang Chao wanted to secretly take you away, but in fact his final goal was to inject the zombie virus into you. That way, he can push the blame to Leader Wu. With his current relationship with you, if there's a zombie riot, he definitely can't escape." Yuan Tianqing looked at them, and his expression darkened. "Is your information true?" Lu Tianyi said, "You heard the gunshots just now. We just met Yang Chao's deputy leader, Pu Zhitsong. This man is lustful and likes to force women. I believe that his appearance here is related to these two." After saying that, he looked at Lin Wenwen and said in a disapproving tone, "Why don't you leave with them? You two girls staying here will only add to the troubles of others. What does it have to do with you?" Long Qingying glared at him coldly when she was suddenly criticized by an outsider. Lin Wenwen fell silent, his eyes flashing. Seeing that Long Qingying was about to lose her temper, she hurriedly stopped her. "All right, Qing. He was right. If we stayed, we would only cause trouble for Brother Tianqing. When they come back this time, we'll leave with them. Anyway, Brother Tianqing would leave this place by then." Long Qingying glanced at her, then turned around and faced the other side. The smile on Lu Tianyi's face faded after hearing Long Qingying's words. Why did he feel like his good intentions had been struck by lightning? "Indeed, it's none of my business, but if you bring trouble to our base and Leader Wu, then it's all our business. Please leave as soon as possible. We don't welcome you here." After saying that, Lu Tianyi stood up and said to Yuan Tianqing, "We've brought the news we should. We help you tonight, but there will definitely be a second and third time. Do as you see fit. If some people go missing, I'll take care of them. If some people go missing, don't beg our leader. Go find Yang Chao yourself." After saying that, he turned around and walked out of the door. Kong Qingming also stood up and looked at Long Qingying with a smile. "My kindness hasn't been repaid yet. Now this doomsday woman is even more unreasonable." Then he followed Lu Tianyi out. Yuan Tianqing leaned against the back of the sofa with his hands crossed in front of his chest. His eyes looked serious, as if he was thinking about something. Qing, what's wrong? Why are you so angry?" "I meant well." Lin Wenwen looked at Long Qingying with a strange expression, not understanding her attitude. Long Qingying snorted and said, "It's nothing, I just don't like their attitude. It's our business to say that we will bring trouble to others. Why do we need them to come here and meddle in our business?" "All right, they've said it. Leader Wu asked them to come. Maybe they didn't want to come. In the end, they still have to go back with their faces full of dust. Besides, if what they said is true, if someone is targeting us, we really shouldn't stay in someone else's base." Lin Wenwen said softly to her. Long Qingying turned around and stared at her. Now that you say that, who said they wanted to stay this morning? Me? Lin Wenwen immediately smiled apologetically. It's me. I was wrong, okay? I was stubborn. I knew it was dangerous, but I still wanted you to stay with me. I was wrong. Don't be angry. Long Qingying snorted at her. It's good that you know it yourself. You've chosen your own path. You chose the path yourself. Lin Wenwen said with a bitter face, I know. I won't be so stubborn in the future, okay? When did you two get so close? Yuan Tianqing suddenly said. The two of them turned around and saw that the others were looking at them with curious expressions. Their eyes seemed to be saying, Don't tell me these two are already in a relationship? Lesbians? Lesbians? What's with that look? Aren't good friends like this? We're just two girls, and you guys are suspicious of us. Aren't you thinking too much? Lin Wenwen looked at the others speechlessly. Yuan Tianqing retracted his gaze and said, But if this Lu Tianyi is right, then we do have to be careful. I didn't expect the other leader of this base to see us as a thorn in their side. This is going to be troublesome. Du Yuanqing said, Did they really cause the gunshots? Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, I'm not sure, but we can't rule out this possibility. Let's take it that way and stay vigilant. Lin Wenwen said, If that's the case, then it's not safe for just the two of us to stay in that house. Long Qingying glanced at her and said, I'm here. What are you afraid of? Yuan Tianqing shook his head and said, Wenwen's right. If Clear Shadow is by yourself, you won't be able to deal with it. If you're alone, then we won't be able to arrive in time if you and Wenwen are in danger. Du Yuanqing said in agreement, That's right. So, Deputy Leader, you go live in their house and protect them. You don't have to worry about us guys. After saying that, he winked at the others. Yuan Tianqing. Was this guy here to mess with him? She grabbed Pu Zhitsong's arm, who was on her neck, with both hands. Then, she bent down and violently threw Pu Zhitsong, who had just caught the syringes, away. Bang! Pu Zhitsong was thrown to the ground by her. He lay on the ground with a confused look on his face. He didn't know what had happened, but he was thrown to the ground. Then, he weakly handed a USB flash drive to her hand, then opened his mouth and said while vomiting blood. But before he finished speaking, his head tilted to the side. Then, there was no more movement from his body. Doctor! Doctor! Emily quickly climbed up and supported Liang Dashu with a panicked face. But Liang Dashu didn't give her any more reaction. Emily trembled as she felt the pulse on the side of his neck and checked his breath. When she realized that Liang Dashu was indeed dead, she was dumbfounded. Don't be in a daze. Leave quickly. Yang Chao's men are here. Suddenly, a hoarse voice came over, telling her to leave quickly. Oh! Emily was shocked and turned her head to look, but she didn't see anyone. But she couldn't ignore what the other party said. Holding the USB flash drive in her hand, Emily looked at Liang Dashu in her arms and could only force herself to calm down. Soon, there was a series of footsteps outside. Emily immediately became alert. She turned her head to look, then lowered her head to look at Liang Dashu for the last time before putting him down on the ground. Then, she stood up and quickly turned to walk out of the messy laboratory. She didn't immediately head towards the direction of the stairs, but turned and quickly left in the other direction. She couldn't let the thing that Liang Dashu just gave to her fall into the hands of Yang Chao's men. So she had to leave now to find Wu Qingyue. A few seconds after she left, a group of armed soldiers rushed in. They held rifles in their hands and quickly came to the destroyed laboratory. Other than two corpses, there was only a pile of debris. Quickly look for the information. He must be hiding here, a man who looked like the leader shouted with a cold face. At the same time, he was also looking around, as if he was looking for something. The others immediately came in and began to rummage through the pile of debris. After searching for a few minutes, they turned the entire place upside down, but found nothing. Boss, I've looked everywhere, but I can't see it. Not here either. Could it be that he didn't put it here? He has a female assistant who always follows him. If she isn't here, she might have already taken the thing and run away, one of the soldiers suddenly said to the leader. The leader looked around and decisively turned around and said, "Go find that woman. Keep an eye on Wu Qingyue and prevent her from getting close to him. Bring some people to the exit of the base and keep an eye on her. Don't let her run out of the base." Yes. On the other side, Lin Xiao quickly left with Tang. He saw that Tang, he was secretly heading towards the direction of Area B. Was he going to find Yang Chao? The bearded doctor seemed to have given something to that woman before he died. It should be very important. He just didn't know if Yang Chao already knew about the thing she took away. Lin Xiao thought about it as she followed behind Tang. He headed towards Area B. Chapter 346. Shen Yuzhen relied on her keen senses and nimble movements. Taking advantage of the darkness of the night, he managed to shake off the level 3 and level 4 psychic pursuers. She hid quietly in a tree and tried to restrain her aura. Gone? He might have run over there. Let's split up and continue looking. Okay. Seeing the people chasing after her, they quickly split up and left. Shen Yuzhen waited until they were far away before jumping down from the tree. Then, she sniffed Pu Xuetsong's scent and quietly looked in his direction. So, in the broken laboratory, not long after the soldiers left, Shen Yuzhen appeared. She walked to the front of a dilapidated laboratory and looked at the 2 corpses that had not been cleaned up in time. She walked to the side of Pu Xuetsong, who was blown beyond recognition, and looked at the metal drill that penetrated deep into his head. Then, she squatted down, grabbed the metal drill with her hand, and forcefully broke it. Crack! Pu Xuetsong's skull was directly torn off, revealing the red and white brain inside. The smell of the infected brain was not pleasant to Shen Yuzhen's nose, but it was not unpleasant either. In any case, it was no longer attractive to her. If it was Liang Dashu's brain, then it would be attractive. But she was not going to do anything to Liang Dashu. She just casually stirred the irregularly shaped metal drill in Pu Xuetsong's brain. Very quickly, she stirred and a crystal core fell out. A level 6 crystal core already had a very obvious radiance. Shen Yuzhen took the crystal core and quickly stood up. Then, she turned and left. On the other side, Tang He did not know that he had been followed all the way to the inner district. He avoided all the eyes and quietly found Yang Chao's high-class apartment building and sneaked in while no one was watching. At this time, other than Yang Chao himself, Yang Hui was sitting on the sofa. "Brother, did you really send an expert to capture him?" Yang Hui sat on the sofa and looked at Yang Chao, who was standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass window. Yang Chao looked out of the window and replied without turning his head, "I did. Just wait. If you want to play, wait until he takes him away. Then you can go find him." Yang Hui took a deep breath excitedly and nodded in anticipation. "All right, I'll be waiting." At this time, someone knocked on the door. The guard outside opened the door and said to Yang Chao, "Chief, Mr. Tang is here." Yang Chao turned his head in surprise. So fast. Then, Tang He walked in from outside. No one inside or outside the house noticed that when the guard opened the door and spoke, a figure had flashed in without a trace. Lin Xiao quietly walked to the corner and stood there with his hands folded in front of his chest. He was ready to listen to the rest of their conversation. After the guard closed the door, Yang Chao looked at Tang He curiously and asked, "How is it? Did you catch him?" Tang He walked over and sat on the empty seat on the sofa. He glanced at Yang Hui. He then turned to Yang Chao and replied, "No, I was alerted by one of your useless subordinates." As soon as he said this, the 2 Yang brothers were stunned. She looked at him in confusion. Yang Chao also walked over and sat on the sofa. He asked in confusion, "Who alerted the enemy?" Tang He said with a face full of dissatisfaction, "Your deputy leader." "Or, what kind of name is that?" He suddenly ran to the neighborhood and met Zhou Shihui's people. The 2 sides had some arguments, and then a female zombie suddenly appeared out of nowhere. Now, after being bitten by that female zombie, he ran to your research institute and blew up the lab. I reckon that someone will report this to you soon. Yang Chao and Yang Hui looked at each other. Pu Luotsang? Why would he go there? That's Wu Qingyue's territory. Isn't he going there to look for suspicion? That idiot. As he said this, his face darkened. Yang Hui said at this time, he seemed to have taken a fancy to the other woman beside Lin Wenwen, but I didn't expect him to be so impatient that he ran over himself. Was he discovered by the people from Pluto's base? Tang He shook his head and said, he hasn't entered the neighborhood yet. I guess Pluto's people don't know what's going on. But Zhou Shihui's people went in, and I don't know what they're doing. Yang Chao asked with a gloomy face, you just said that the lab blew up. What's going on? Tell me what happened there first. Is Pu Luotsang dead? Tang He's face didn't look good either. He nodded. Yes. He's about to become a zombie, and he still ran to that bearded man for some antidote. Then the bearded man killed himself with a grenade. What did you say? Liang Dashu is also dead. But when he heard the last sentence, Yang Chao's face changed. Tang He looked at him with some doubt. Yes, he's dead. What's wrong? Yang Chao suddenly stood up from the sofa and asked anxiously, he's dead? Did he say anything before he died? Or did he hide anything? Tang He was a little confused by his reaction. Suddenly, something flashed in his mind. He thought of the purpose of Pu Luotsang running to the lab, and then his face changed slightly. He looked at Yang Chao with some doubt. You mean he really developed an antidote for the zombie virus? Yang Chao said, don't worry about this. Did you see what he hid? Or did he say anything? Tang He's eyes flashed, and then he said no. But the woman beside him is not dead if you think he has something to hide. Then he must have given it to that woman. Yang Chao abruptly turned around and quickly walked to the door to open it. Then he said a few words to the guard outside the door, and the guard quickly left. Only then did he close the door and return. He glanced at Yang Hui before saying to the other two, that's right. That Liang Dashu really did have some amazing breakthrough in his experiments. I suspect that it should be related to the zombie virus. He has been focusing on this aspect, so I believe him. His results must be related to alleviating the zombie virus. Then he looked at Tang He and said, but now he's dead. If he didn't hide the results of his research, then it's on the woman beside him. Yang Hui and Tang He's faces were filled with disbelief as they stared at him in shock. Tang He reacted quickly. Then what are we waiting for? Hurry up and catch that woman. Yang Chao said, didn't you see that I just sent someone? Yang Hui suddenly asked hesitantly then, should we catch that Lin Wenwen? Yang Chao said lightly, catch. Why not? We've alerted the enemy this time, so we'll wait for the next time. Anyway, they won't leave the base so soon. Even if they want to leave, I'll find a way to make them stay. And I'm going to turn her into a zombie to make trouble for Wu Qingyue. After saying that, a gloomy and calculating expression flashed across his mature and charming face. But as soon as she turned around, she reached out to pick up the whole plate of pancakes on the table and then swung her hand hard, smashing it at the servant who had been cowering on the side. Make it again. If you can't make something that my son likes to eat today, you're not allowed to leave. She screamed at the servant with an angry face. Seeing the plate coming at her, the servant was already prepared in her heart. She hurriedly raised her two arms to protect her head and face. Clang! The plate hit her arm. After being hit by the plate, the servant didn't dare to talk back. Instead, she immediately knelt on the ground, picked up the plate and pancake that had fallen, and said timidly, yes, 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 I will make it again. Hurry up and go. Why are you still kneeling there? Yang Yin shouted at her angrily. She couldn't get rid of the anger in her heart. Seeing her son like this now, she wanted to chop those women into pieces and feed them to the dogs. If it weren't for them, her son wouldn't have been so scared. Her son wouldn't even be able to eat. He would vomit as soon as he ate and could only drink water. As a last resort, she thought of asking someone to make some delicious pancakes to see if her son would eat them. The result was still the same, and her brother had promised to help her deal with those people. But now, He was still living well, and nothing had happened to him. This made the anger in Yang Yan's heart uncomfortable, but she had nowhere to vent it. That was why she kept hitting the servant to vent her anger. The man who was playing a game in the room turned a deaf ear to her scolding and calmly played his game. Lin Xiao slowly walked toward Yang Yin and stood coldly behind her. Then, he reached out and grabbed her hair. Yang Yan's whole body suddenly flashed and disappeared. But the moment she disappeared, no one noticed. Because the man in the room didn't face Yang Yin at all. The man on the balcony only cared about playing with his gun. The little boy on the sofa was also wrapped in the quilt. The 5-year-old girl looked up at the place where Yang Yin disappeared in a daze. "Mom? Mom? Mom?" Hearing the little girl's cry, the man in the room thought it was just a bored child's cry. He didn't care, so he didn't look back. But the man on the balcony looked back because of the little girl's voice, but he didn't see Yang Yin. His first reaction was that Yang Yin might have gone to the room or the kitchen, so he didn't care and looked away. And at this moment, Yang Yin only felt that her hair was pulled, and the sofa under her, but suddenly disappeared. Then she fell to the ground. But as soon as she sat down, she was shocked. When she looked up, the scene in front of her had changed. Her living room was gone, and the 2 children who were in front of her just now were also gone. In front of him was an unfamiliar forest. It was dark and eerie. He ran to the little boy who had shrunk back into the blanket and picked him up along with the blanket. Then, he walked far away. Yang Chao looked at the few metahumans he had sent to protect the family and asked in a low voice, "What do you have to say?" They all looked at each other, and the man who had been standing on the balcony said in a panic, We didn't feel anything, and we didn't notice any signs of anyone coming." The others nodded, but they didn't continue to speak. Now that the person had died under their protection, death was death. They had already failed in their duty, and there was no point in trying to defend themselves to Yang Chao. The other party only cared about the fact that they didn't protect the master well. In fact, in their hearts, they were already waiting for death. They deserved to die for not protecting the family of the leader. Moreover, Yang Chao wasn't a soft-hearted person. On the contrary, he was a ruthless person. Sure enough, after they nodded, Yang Chao suddenly waved his hand. With a wave of his hand, the few level 5 metahumans were swept away by a small tornado. They directly rushed out of the balcony. A series of screams rang out. The 4 metahumans were trapped in his wind, and then there were constantly wind blades spinning around and cutting them. Bright red blood rain fell from the balcony of Yang Yan's house. Lin Xiao stood on the roof of the opposite building and watched their reaction. Then she turned around and directly jumped down from the building there. She went to where Lin Wenwen and the others lived. On the other side, after Xin Yuzhen left, she sniffed in the direction of Lin Xiao's scent. In the end, she found that she was in the inner area. There were many advanced metahumans in the inner area, so she didn't dare to go there. So, she could only turn around and sneak back to the neighborhood where she had attacked Pu Xuetsong. Miss Lu had said that if she had nowhere else to go, she might go there and wait for her. When she reached the intersection of the neighborhood, she hid in a dark corner and waited. Not long after, someone suddenly appeared beside her. Lin Xiao had sensed Xin Yuzhen's scent from afar, so she only showed up when she was beside her. "Go in. You can't appear in the base now. Hide for a while." Xin Yuzhen knew what she meant. She had already been discovered. If she stayed in the base, it would be easy for her to get into trouble, and she might even implicate others. She nodded, indicating that she was willing to go into the space with her. Lin Xiao reached out to take her. Xin Yuzhen dodged, then took out an energy core in her hand. From the energy inside, it could be seen that it was a level 6 energy core. She handed the core to Lin Xiao. "Is it from the man just now?" Lin Xiao smelled the core. It was the same as the man Xin Yuzhen had bitten. Xin Yuzhen nodded, and then extended the core in her hand to her. "For me?" Lin Xiao looked at her with some surprise. Although Xin Yuzhen couldn't absorb this level 6 energy core for now, She could save it for later when the zombies' levels were higher. Shen Yuzhen nodded again, and then looked up at Lin Xiao with gratitude. Do you want to repay me with this? Forget it. I want a level 6 energy core, and I have the ability to get it now. You can keep this for yourself. Lin Xiao knew her intention and refused with a smile. Chapter 349. Shen Yuzhen shook her head and refused to accept Lin Xiao's refusal. Then he forcefully pulled her hand and stuffed the crystal core into her hand. Lin Xiao took the crystal core and shook her head. Actually, if you want to thank me, you can work for me in the future. This crystal core can help you improve your strength so you can help me do some things. Shen Yuzhen was stunned, then looked at her silently. Yes, she had become a zombie again, and her ability was not activated. Even if she wanted to help her, she might not be able to do anything big. Lin Xiao said to her, So, if you want to help me, I'll just put it away and wait until I get out of this base. When we get out of this base, I will help you improve your zombie level. Then she returned the crystal core to her. This time, Shen Yuzhen did not insist on giving the core to her. After thinking about it, she realized that she was right. He could only put away the crystal core, then looked at her and nodded. Lin Xiao took her into the space and then went back to Lin Wenwen's room. Because of Lu Tiany's announcement, Lin Wenwen's room was immediately strengthened. Lu Junjie and a few ordinary people took turns to guard the balcony. Du Yuanxing in the living room stared at Yuan Tianxing with disdain. What are you looking at me for? Didn't you say you want me to protect them? How can I protect them by myself? Isn't it better if we are together? Yuan Tianxing sat on the sofa on the other side, reading an unknown book. He glanced at him calmly and said. Du Yuanxing rolled his eyes and said, You alone are enough. Why do you need us to join in? Yuan Tianxing said, Isn't it better to have more peoples? Du Yuanxing shrugged and said, Fine. You are the boss. You have the final say. Lin Wenwen in the bedroom frowned slightly. His face was deep in thought. What are you thinking about? Your eyebrows are almost knitted together. Long Qingying, who was sitting on the sofa, carefully wiped her katana with a piece of cloth. She looked at Lin Wenwen and asked. Lin Wenwen sighed and said, Maybe if I stay, I will really cause unnecessary trouble for Brother Tianxing. I am thinking that I am too willful to stay, but I'm very conflicted. I want to be closer to Brother Tianxing and see him. Long Qingying looked at her sharp blade and said, It's fine as long as you know how to be willful. From a bystander's point of view, if you really like him, you shouldn't cause trouble for him. You are now an older woman, not a 17 or 18-year-old girl who is easily impulsive. As she spoke, she placed the katana's blade in front of her eyes and carefully stared at the lines of the blade. She blew on the blade and continued, If you want to be with him, you have to look at the situation first. At a time like this, you should follow Lin Feng and the rest out. At least if he went there, it would be easier to deal with the zombies than the humans here. After all, we are outsiders. Do you think others will be polite to you? Just think about that kid and that woman, and you should know. Lin Wenwen nodded. From that day on, she didn't dare to wear dresses anymore. She always wore jeans in the base. She originally thought that because of their cooperation with Wu Qingyue, the people in the base would at least give them some face. But now she found that she was wrong. They only came to ask others to do things for them. It wasn't others who begged them to come. The status of the two was different. Because the situation was different, their treatment was also different. Under someone else's roof, they had to lower their heads. She could only blame herself for not learning to face their current situation. It was also because her elder sister protected them too well in the past. She was now in a struggle between reason and emotion. On one hand, she rationally told herself to leave Sea City Base as soon as possible, which was good for everyone. On the other hand, she didn't want to leave Yuan Tianxing. Although she couldn't get his emotional response, it was good to be close to him. If only her elder sister was here. Her elder sister would definitely criticize her severely and then kick her out. She wouldn't let herself be tangled and troubled here. She needed someone to take care of herself. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to take care of herself. But her elder sister, Thinking of Lin Xiao, Lin Wenwen felt sad. But soon, she suddenly thought of that female zombie Lu Tianyu. She didn't know why, but the longer they got along, the more she saw the shadow of her elder sister in the other party, as well as those handwriting, the tone of voice, and the occasional small movements. There was also that familiar temperament, that inexplicable sense of familiarity. Sometimes, Lin Wenwen would wonder why this Lu Tianyu would specially come to help them. "Qingqing, do you think my elder sister is really dead?" She suddenly asked Long Qingying in a daze. Long Qingying looked up at her strangely and asked, "What do you mean?" "I think the leader is very powerful. She might not really be dead. Even if she was defeated, the possibility of her escaping is very high. In fact, I never believed that she was dead. Maybe she will come back in the future." Lin Wenwen said suspiciously, "Then if she is not dead, has she come back?" Long Qingying didn't care very much and replied, "Maybe." At this time, in Wu Qingyue's house, Xiao Yunlong's car had just driven into the house. Xiao Yunlong opened the door and got out of the car. As soon as he entered the living room, he saw Wu Qingyue and Meng Yu sitting in the living room. They seemed to be talking about preparing to go out of the base to collect supplies. "You're back? Why are you so late? Have you eaten yet?" Wu Qingyue looked up at him and asked. Xiao Yunlong said, "I haven't eaten yet. I came back after seeing their next arrangements." Wu Qingyue immediately asked, "Have they decided on the location? Are they ready to start construction?" Xiao Yunlong shook his head and said, "They haven't started yet, but the place seems to have been decided. They plan to build the wall in the inner area first. It is estimated that they will wait for Yuan Tianxing here before they can officially start construction." Wu Qingyue seemed to have expected it and nodded, saying, "I think so too." At this time, Xiao Liqing suddenly ran in and said to the crowd, "Leader, something happened in the research room. Dr. Liang was killed." "What did you say?" Wu Qingyue and Xiao Yunlong looked at him in surprise. Xiao Liqing said, "The news just came." Wu Qingyue immediately stood up and threw the information in his hand on the table. Then, without saying anything, he went straight out. Xiao Liqing quickly helped him pick up his coat and went out with Xiao Yunlong. Meng Yu also stood up from the sofa, but she just watched the others leave and did not follow them out. "Oh, are you blaming me for thinking too much? You don't appreciate my kindness for coming to inform you so late at night?" Yuan Tianxing shook his head and said, "Why would I? I don't have such words." Right at this moment, Lin Wenwen opened the door slightly and asked Long Qingying with a surprised expression, "Qingqing, who is the woman outside?" Long Qingying put the towel she used to wipe her on the table and put the knife back into its sheath. Then she put it on the chair, stood up, and walked to the door. She looked out from behind Lin Wenwen. "I don't know, but I can see the way she's looking at the deputy leader. It seems that your love rival has appeared." Lin Wenwen's eyes were a little unreadable. She nodded. "Yes, I feel it." The two of them closed the door slightly and silently listened to the conversation outside. They found that the purpose of the beautiful woman was the same as that of Lu Tianyi. Long Qingying frowned and said, "There are a lot of nosy people tonight. This woman is obviously here for the deputy leader. Then who are those men coming for?" Lin Wenwen suddenly had a flash of inspiration when she asked this question. She looked back at Long Qingying and asked, "That man seems to be called Lu Tianyi, and Sister Lu seems to be called Lu Tianyu. Now that you mention it, why do I suddenly feel like there's something going on between them?" Long Qingying also looked at her with a slight surprise. Yin Fangyu didn't stay any longer. She knew that someone had come before them to inform them. She casually chatted with Yuan Tianxing for a while before leaving with her men on her 10-centimeter high heel shoes. Don't think that it's hard for her to walk in such high heels. Of all the women in the base, only this great beauty Yin walked outside every day with her hate-the-sky shoes. And she walked steadily and neatly, without a sense of cautiousness at all. Of course, if you bullied her because she was wearing high heels, who would be the unlucky one then? After Yin Fangyu's beautiful figure left, Lin Wenwen and Yuan Tianxing came out of the bedroom. "Who was that beauty just now?" She sat on the sofa and asked curiously. Yuan Tianqing replied, "Oh, one of the deputy leaders here." Lin Wenwen was a little surprised. She's the deputy leader? No wonder she's so imposing. She's a high-ranking official, but she's so beautiful. There must be a lot of men chasing after her, and they must not be simple men. Du Yuanqing immediately became interested and said to her, "Yes, that's right. I heard that the men chasing after her in this base are lining up outside the gate of the base. She's the goddess of this base, and she's unclaimed." Long Qing said indifferently, "You're drooling." Du Yuanqing glanced at her with a smirk and said, Are you jealous?" Long Qing rolled her eyes at him and said, "You're crazy. What's there to be jealous of? So, what if there are many people chasing after her? In the end, she will only belong to one man." At this time, Lin Wenwen was thinking of a question. What was the relationship between Lu Tianyu and Lu Tianyi? By the way, Lu Tianyu was originally from the sea, but why didn't she seem to have returned home? Did anyone in this base know her? Chapter 351. So she's the woman who brought you trouble. Suddenly, a familiar hoarse voice sounded. Yuan Tianqing, Du Yuanqing, Lin Wenwen, and Long Qingying looked in the direction of the voice at the same time and saw a woman wearing a hat and sunglasses standing there without them noticing. Lin Xiao took off her sunglasses, revealing a pair of dark eyes with a hint of green in the middle. Lin Wenwen saw her and said happily, "Hey, Sister Lu, you're back?" Lin Xiao smiled at her and nodded. The smile on Yuan Tianqing's handsome face became much more genuine, and he said, "That's great. We can leave soon." Lin Xiao shook her head and said, "I'm afraid we can't leave for a while." Her words stunned the others, and they all looked at her in confusion. "Why?" Lin Wenwen asked. Lin Xiao said, "Because a few people died tonight, the base will soon be in chaos. It won't be long. People will probably come tomorrow at dawn." Lin Wenwen exchanged glances with the others in surprise. Yuan Tianqing's eyes flashed, and he asked, "You seem to know who died?" Lin Xiao smiled faintly and said, "Of course, a deputy leader, a leader's sister, and a researcher studying the zombie virus died. What do you think?" As she spoke, she walked to the window and leaned against it, carefully looking outside. Yuan Tianqing and the rest's expressions changed slightly, and they stared at her in bewilderment. How could they die? And you shouldn't have appeared at this time. Lin Wenwen suddenly frowned and said. Yuan Tianqing's face also darkened, and he quickly walked to the window and closed the curtains. Wenwen is right. You appearing at this time is a great opportunity. You appearing at this time will only make Yang Chao suspect you. Moreover, why did those people suddenly die? Also, Yang Chao's family should have been well protected by him. Who in the base would dare to do anything to her without any scruples? Lin Xiao said faintly, "Because I was the one who did it. Of course I have no scruples." When Lin Wenwen heard that Yang Yin was dead, he was secretly happy. But when he heard that Lin Xiao was the one who did it, Lin Wenwen looked at her in shock like everyone else. Suddenly, he didn't know what to say. Du Yuanqing stared at Lin Xiao as if he had seen a ghost and said, "Big sister, you're causing trouble." "That's exactly what I want to do," Lin Xiao said with a mischievous smile. Then he shrugged and said nonchalantly, "Don't worry. Someone will use this opportunity to deal with Yang Chao soon. He doesn't have time for us." "Who?" everyone asked in unison. Lin Xiao said, "Who is his enemy?" "Wu Qingyue." The crowd answered again. Lin Wenwen and Yuan Tianqing were quick-witted and immediately understood what Lin Xiao was trying to say. Could it be that the person who died was one of Leader Wu's men? So do you think he'll use this opportunity to retaliate against Yang Chao? She said with her eyes slightly widened. Lin Xiao smiled and gave her a meaningful look. Yuan Tianqing nodded and said, "I wouldn't let go of this opportunity if I were Wu Qingyue. Perhaps Leader Wu still has something that he hasn't revealed yet." Lin Xiao nodded and said, "He's the leader of a base after all. Even if there's no opportunity, he'll create one himself." At this moment, Lin Wenwen suddenly looked at Lin Xiao and asked, "Hey, you just said the woman who brought you trouble. Are you referring to that woman just now? Who did she bring trouble to? Lin Xiao pointed at Yuan Tianxing and said, him. Or should I say, he's the one who got into trouble. Do you know that Yang Chao is so jealous that he wants to kill him because that woman has been getting close to him recently? He found a group of robbers and was prepared to kill him when he left the base. I don't know where Yang Chao found these level 7 robbers, but he's not afraid of being bitten in the back. As soon as she finished speaking, the other 3 people in the room stared at Yuan Tianxing's eyes in silence. Yuan Tianxing, who got into trouble, said, "What does this have to do with me? I'm just an innocent bystander, okay?" Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. He looked at Lin Xiao and said, "Oh, right. I almost remembered that there's something about you." Lin Xiao looked at him curiously as he walked out of the room and seemed to go to the opposite room. After a few minutes, he came back with a small box in his hand. "Wu Qingwei gave this to you." Yuan Tianxing handed the box to her. "He gave it to you? What is it?" Lin Xiao asked. Yuan Tianxing stuffed the box in her hand and said, "Oh, I think it's a pair of contact lenses." Lin Xiao looked at him in surprise and asked curiously, "Why would he find this kind of glasses for me?" Yuan Tianxing spread his hands and said, "How would I know? You'll have to ask him yourself." Lin Xiao opened the box in her hand in confusion and found that the transparent glasses inside were perfectly preserved and didn't look broken. After Yang Chao dealt with Yang Yan's death, he immediately sent people to search the entire base. Yang Yan's wound seemed to be bite marks from a beast, but there's a serious zombie virus on it. If her brain wasn't bitten off, she would have become a zombie by now. Everyone searched the base. Not only did zombies sneak into the base, but even zombie beasts have sneaked in. Yang Chao stood in the living room of his apartment, his face gloomy and cold. An invisible pressure filled the room, making the breathing of the group of people in front of them slow down. "What are you standing there for? All of you go. Now. Immediately." Seeing that these people's reactions were a beat slower after he gave the mission, Yang Chao immediately shouted. Yes. Most of the people immediately responded, then turned around to leave. "You two stay, the rest go out." Yang Chao suddenly pointed at 2 people and told them to stay, then said to them, "Go and call the virus research team 1 in the research institute over." Yes. Soon, only Yang Chao was left in the room, and Tang He walked out from the inside. "Could these zombies have escaped from your research institute?" he asked suspiciously. Yang Chao looked at him and said, "The only place in the base with zombies is the research institute. If zombies have escaped, then it must have come from there. Liang Dashu is dead, and the woman beside him is missing. His important information might have been taken away." "That's right. You were seen by that woman. It's best to hide yourself and not be discovered by Wu Qingyue. Otherwise, we'll both be in trouble." Tang He said with an indifferent expression, "Even if you didn't say it, I would still hide. But the information you said is that there's a way to alleviate the virus. Is that true?" Chapter 352. Yang Chao glanced at him and said, "We're on the same boat now. I don't need to lie to you. Also, this was supposed to be kept a secret. Letting you know already shows that I value our cooperation. What are you still doubting?" Tang He said, "Then, do you have a way to get Wu Qingyue off the stage?" Yang Chao looked at him and said, "I was going to ask you to capture the woman from Hades King's base and turn her into a zombie. That way, I would have a reason to expel her from the base, but you haven't helped me capture her yet." Tang He looked at him deeply, then shrugged and nodded. "Okay, you just want to capture someone from Hades' base. It doesn't matter who it is. So even if you don't capture that woman, you can capture someone else. I'll go now. You should hurry and solve the problem of your research institute." He also knew that the research institute was managed by Yang Chao, although it was built by the cooperation of the 3 leaders. Now that it was his people who were in charge, the first problem was that he didn't manage it properly. In addition, his sister was suddenly killed by a zombie in his own home. This was obviously revenge. Yang Chao must be very sad and angry. Just look at his cold face. When Tang He was about to turn around and leave, he suddenly thought of something and stopped. He turned around and looked at Yang Chao and said, "All right, I saw the zombie that bit your subordinate. It was a female zombie. But there's something strange." He paused and said with a confused and conflicted expression, "There were a lot of people at the scene, but the female zombie only attacked your subordinate." She turned a blind eye to the others. "What's going on?" Yang Chao's expression froze for a moment. Then he looked at him and asked, "What did you say? Will that zombie choose someone to attack?" Tangy nodded and said, "It seems like it. I don't know what level it is." Yang Chao frowned and continued to look at him and asked, "You can't feel its level? What does it look like?" Tangy shook his head and said, "I can't see what it looks like, but with long hair, it's definitely a female zombie." Yang Chao became silent and frowned, not knowing what he was thinking. Tangy then turned around and left. Not long after, the two subordinates that Yang Chao sent to find the research team suddenly ran back in a hurry. "Leader, this is bad. Everyone from Research Group 1 is gone." Yang Chao's expression immediately changed. He looked at his two subordinates in surprise. "What? How could he disappear? Where did he go?" The two men replied with sweat on their foreheads. "When we arrived, the house was already empty. I asked the neighbors, but they said they didn't see them go back." Yang Chao's expression quickly regained its composure, but it also darkened. "Send more people to search." "Yes." On this side, Yang Chao was a little flustered because of the disappearance of his researchers. On the other side, Wu Qingyue brought everyone to the destroyed laboratory of the Research Institute and looked at the mess. There were also 2 corpses inside. After Xiao Liqing quickly checked the scene with his white gloves, he turned around and reported to Wu Qingyue, "Leader, Pu Krokang's crystal core has been taken." Then he continued, "Moreover, he has a strong zombie virus in his body. There are bite marks on his arm, so he must have been bitten by a zombie." Wu Qingyue listened to his words without any expression on his face. He quietly looked at Liang Dashu's body a few times, then said, "Take good care of Dr. Liang's funeral. Also, keep an eye on those researchers. Don't let Yang Chao find out where they are." Another captain next to him immediately nodded and said, "Yes. You guys, carry out the doctor's body first." Wu Qingyue walked behind Xiao Liqing, who was squatting on the ground, looked at Pu Krokang's body in front of him, and said, "The head cover has been removed, so of course the target is the crystal core. But how did he get bitten by zombies? Could it be that one of these escaped?" As he spoke, he turned to look at the rows of zombie glass boxes outside the laboratory. Xiao Yunlong shook his head and said, "I just checked. No zombies are missing. It shouldn't be here." Wu Qingyue said strangely, "Then where did the zombies come from?" He thought for a moment, then suddenly looked at Xiao Yunlong and said, "Could it be that she came back here? Didn't you say she left before you?" Xiao Yunlong nodded in agreement and said, "It's possible. But she said she seemed to have something on the way and might be delayed. Anyway, even if she came back, we wouldn't know. She is used to being invisible." "Leader, this Pu Krokang was bitten in the residential area of D area and then ran all the way here. Although I don't know why he ran here, he just happened to meet Dr. Liang. Or did he come here specifically to find the doctor?" Xiao Liqing stood up from the ground, looked away from Pu Krokang's body, and looked at Wu Qingyue. Wu Qingyue's eyes flashed, nodded, and said, "It should be possible. But why did she let the zombies bite Pu Krokang?" Just as he was feeling puzzled, a soldier suddenly ran in from outside. Then he said something to their captain's ear, and then he saw the captain's expression become slightly dignified. "Leader." The captain immediately turned to Wu Qingyue and said, "Yang Yin just died, and her death was very tragic." Yang Chao, in a rage, strangled the paranormals who protected Yang Yin with the wind. Wu Qingyue and the others looked at him in surprise. "She died? How tragic." The captain said, "Her head and one of her shoulders and arms were bitten off. It seems to have been bitten by a mourning dog." And Yang Chao didn't even find a shadow of the murderer. Now a large number of people have begun to search the base. A head and an arm, so tragic. It must be revenge. Needless to say, to be able to come and go without a trace and kill people like this. It must be that guy. There's even a zombie beast. She wouldn't have kept a zombie dog as a pet, right? Wu Qinghua thought for a moment and guessed who had the ability to do so. And this Yang Yin offended Lin Wenwen not long ago. I don't know if she killed her because of Lin Wenwen. Maybe her goal is the same as ours, to kill Yang Chao. But this thing, as he spoke, he suddenly had a headache and continued. Can't she just be a good zombie? Why did she come here to cause trouble? Although it was Yang Chao who caused trouble, it created an opportunity for us. But if she continues to cause trouble like this, our base will be in a mess. I have this premonition. This time Xiao Yunlong, Xiao Liqing, and the others all knew who he was referring to. Thinking about that female zombie style of doing things and strength, everyone was silent for a moment, inexplicably having a feeling of foreboding a storm. Why did it feel like someone was going to cause trouble? The next day at dawn, all the important officials of Haiqing Base went to a meeting. There were soldiers everywhere in the base, and there was a sentry every 3 to 5 steps. Lin Wenwen looked left and right in the room early in the morning. When she didn't see Lin Xiao, she asked, "Hey, where did Sister Lu go?" The others looked at her and shook their heads. "I don't know." Lin Wenwen rolled her eyes, then said with a smile, "Well, I'm going out today." When she said that, everyone immediately looked at her in confusion. "You're going out? Look at the situation now. Where are you going? Don't run around. What if something happens?" Yuan Tianqing frowned slightly and said to her. The others nodded in agreement. Lin Wenwen walked in front of Yuan Tianqing and said, "Brother Tianqing, I have a question to ask you. If my sister didn't die and came back one day, but her appearance and identity have changed, what would you do?" Yuan Tianqing looked at her expression and was stunned for a moment, then looked at her in silence. On his handsome face, the pair of eyes that usually had a smile on them were as calm as a lake. After more than 10 seconds, he looked at Lin Wenwen and said slowly, "No matter what she becomes, she's still my boss. Our team only recognizes her soul, not her appearance." Lin Wenwen's eyes darkened slightly, and a ray of tears flashed. She lowered her eyes and then opened them again. Lin Wenwen, who opened her eyes again, said calmly, "Me too. So now I want to go out and find out something. No matter what danger there is, they can't stop me." Yuan Tianqing looked at her curiously. "Where do you want to go?" Lin Wenwen pondered and said, "I don't know, but it shouldn't be too far." Yuan Tianqing and Du Yuanqing looked at each other and didn't understand why Lin Wenwen would do this. Lin Wenwen looked at Yuan Tianqing with an unfathomable gaze and said, "Brother Tianqing, someone is hiding something from us. Then we'll have to figure it out ourselves. Also, that Yang Chao shouldn't have time to care about me today." Yuan Tianqing asked, "What do you want to find out? What does this have to do with your sister?" Lin Wenwen said, "Whether it has anything to do with me or not depends on the outcome." She turned and walked towards the door. "Qingqing, let's go." Long Qingying carried her katana and followed her out. Yuan Tianqing said to Du Yuanqing, "Yuanqing, you go with her." Wenwen is right because the big shots in the base don't have time to care about outsiders like us, so it's relatively safer for her to go out now. With you and Qingqing around, be more vigilant. Even if there is a situation, we should be able to deal with it. Du Yuanqing looked at him, then nodded and stood up. "Got it." With that, he walked towards the door and followed Lin Wenwen downstairs. Chapter 354. Du Yuanqing ran up to the two girls and asked, "What do you want to investigate?" Lin Wenwen walked in front and didn't answer him. Instead, she asked, "Du Yuanqing, do you know Sister Lu's interpersonal relationships in this base?" Du Yuanqing was stunned and stopped. He asked in surprise, "Huh? You want to ask about Miss Lu?" Long Qingying also looked at her. "Then what you said just now, does Miss Lu have anything to do with the leader?" Lin Wenwen nodded and said hesitantly, "I have some ideas and guesses, but I need to confirm them." Long Qingying said strangely, Then can't you just ask her? Why do you have to ask behind her back? Lin Wenwen shook his head and said, she definitely won't say it. If she will say it, if she would, she wouldn't use this identity to get close to us. Long Qingying and Du Yuanqing looked at each other blankly, not quite understanding what Lin Wenwen meant. What identity? Does she have another identity? Long Qingying suddenly looked around and said with a strange expression, do you think she's actually following us? She always suddenly appears and then disappears. And now we're talking about her. Lin Wenwen said calmly, no, I think she's probably going to watch the big shots at the base now. If it's her, she likes to do this kind of thing. Isn't Leader Wu going to cause trouble? Long Qingying and Du Yuanqing looked at her in confusion. How do you know? Lin Wenwen shrugged and said, I guessed. Then she turned around and was about to continue walking down. At this time, Du Yuanqing finally couldn't help but say, well, if you just want to ask about Miss Liu, I actually know everything. If you really want to know about her, you don't have to ask about her. Lin Wenwen stopped and looked back at him in surprise. You know? Really? Du Yuanqing nodded and said, actually, she's quite famous. Lin Wenwen suddenly rushed forward and grabbed him, then walked down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs, she stopped and looked around, then pulled him to the window in the corner. Then why didn't you say so earlier? Who is she? What did you find out? Long Qingying walked down and stood beside her, also looking at Du Yuanqing curiously. Du Yuanqing looked around, and after confirming that there was no one around, he said, she's quite famous, but he has a bad reputation. Lin Wenwen asked curiously, why? Is there a reason? Du Yuanqing said, I heard that she used to be an ordinary woman who relied on her beauty and body to survive under men. Furthermore, she was a woman who loved vanity, had evil intentions, and loved to do evil. After she became Yang Chao's lover, she used her identity as the leader's lover. He had done a lot of bad things in this base, offended a lot of people, and caused a lot of trouble for Yang Chao. So after Yang Chao got tired of her, he probably thought that she was too old and kicked her out. Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying looked at each other in surprise. They didn't expect Miss Liu to be such a person. How could that be? Based on what you said, this woman should be the kind of person who is very annoying. But now I feel that Miss Liu is quite a nice person. She doesn't have that kind of feeling, Long Qingying said with a puzzled look. Du Yuanqing nodded repeatedly and said in agreement, yes. When the deputy leader and I found out, we were also very surprised and couldn't believe it. We even thought that the person we found out was actually someone else, not her. Lin Wenwen's expression was a little thoughtful. She thought for a moment and then said, according to what you said, then she's like a different person from before, right? Du Yuanqing nodded and said, yes, before and after she was like two different people. I heard that when she died, it was because she liked Leader Wu. Then Yang Chao sent people to instigate her to kidnap Leader Wu's little princess. I don't know what method she used, but she really did kidnap the little princess. Long Qingying and Lin Wenwen both had a strange expression on their faces. She really wanted to die. Could it be that she used space to take the little princess away? Long Qingying guessed doubtfully. Du Yuanqing shook his head and said, no, she was an ordinary person before and had no abilities. If she was a space ability user, then she wouldn't need to rely on her body and face to survive. Long Qingying nodded and said, that's true. Du Yuanqing continued to say, you guys can't imagine what she did after that. I heard that she, raped Leader Wu and was killed by Leader Wu outside. That's why she became a zombie. As he said the last part, his voice became smaller and he looked around with a strange expression. Wait. What did you just say? Lin Wenwen had a confused look and quickly interrupted him. What? What do you mean by she raped Wu Qingyue? Long Qingying also slightly widened her eyes and stared at Du Yuanqing, a strange expression on her face. Du Yuanqing quickly made a shushing gesture to Lin Wenwen. Shu, don't be so loud. This matter is actually known by many people here, but for the sake of Leader Wu's face, don't talk nonsense. Lin Wenwen didn't know whether to laugh or cry and said, so, she actually caused her own death? Speaking of which, did Leader Wu really kill her? Is he that kind of person? Although he was raped, but he wouldn't hate her so much that he killed her, right? Du Yuanqing said, and there seems to be some inside story to this matter. We didn't ask too much, afraid that it would make Leader Wu angry. And now everyone can see the little princess is also safe and sound at home. So, we don't think you would really kill Miss Lu. Long Qingying said expressionlessly. That's not necessarily true. Rape doesn't discriminate between men and women. You can't forgive her just because she's a woman. Who told her to rape a man from a good family? Why do I feel like laughing when I hear you say that? Du Yuanqing looked at her with amusement. Lin Wenwen nodded and said, that's true. Then Long Qingying suddenly said, then hearing what you said, doesn't that mean that she and Wu Qingyue are enemies? Then why does it seem like nothing happened between the two of them? If Wu Qingyue saw that she was the woman who kidnapped his daughter and raped her, how could she still cooperate with them peacefully like this? Du Yuanqing replied, oh, maybe it's because her appearance is too different from now. I think that Wu Qingyue doesn't seem to recognize her yet. I heard that she used to wear a lot of makeup on her face, and even in the Valkyrie, she would wear a short skirt that only covered her buttocks, revealing a pair of white legs and high-heel shoes. She was a woman who loved to dress up. But compared to her appearance now, maybe they really are two different people. And maybe other than Wu Qingyue, no one else recognized her. Chapter 355. Lin Wenwen and Long Qingying imagine the scene of Lu Tianyu swaying around in front of them in a miniskirt with heavy makeup on her face, and then having fun under the man's body with a rippling expression. They couldn't help but shake their heads, feeling that something strange had gotten into her mind. Du Yuanqing asked her, do you still want to go out and ask around? Lin Wenwen shook her head and said, you've already said it. Why should I go out? I'd better go back. I already know the answer I want. Du Yuanqing and Long Qingying looked at her strangely. What answer? Lin Wenwen smiled mysteriously and said, you'll know soon enough. Let's go back. Yuan Tianxing, who was standing by the window and ready to watch Lin Wenwen and the others walk out of the neighborhood, was pushed open before he could see them. Yuan Tianxing turned his head and saw that the three people who had left for less than 10 minutes had come back. He asked in surprise, didn't you go out? Why are you back? Lin Wenwen smiled and said, I'm not going. Then she went back into the house, leaving Yuan Tianxing looking at the other two people in confusion. Long Qingying, who had returned to the house, closed the door and looked at Lin Wenwen strangely. Why do you want to ask about Miss Lu? And you just mentioned the leader of the Nether Fire to the deputy leader. Does this have anything to do with her? Did you find something? Lin Wenwen leaned against the bedroom window and looked up at the clouds outside. She had a relaxed smile on her face, as if she had let go of something in her heart. Hearing Long Qingying's words, Lin Wenwen turned back and smiled at her. She said, maybe there is. Maybe you'll know when the time comes. She didn't say what she had confirmed. Long Qingying didn't care that she didn't want to say it. She said with a strange expression, I didn't expect Miss Lu to be such a person. She's completely different from the person Du Yuanqing described. Could there be a mistake? Lin Wenwen looked back at her and said, there should be no mistake. If he could make a mistake about these things, Du Yuanqing doesn't deserve to live in this world. Long Qingying thought for a moment and nodded. That's true. But did Miss Lu really do those things before? Lin Wenwen looked at her. Maybe, because that was her in the past, not the current her. Lin Wenwen thought, after a person dies, he becomes a zombie and wakes up, but he becomes a zombie with memories and soul. Moreover, his personality, temper, and behavior were all different from before. He was like a different person. If it wasn't an act, it meant that she might have become another person. There were many ways for a person to become another person. It could be to pretend for a long time and then forget or hide one's true nature. They could also be influenced by others, such as stimulation or hypnosis to become another person. The third type was the soul, which had already become another soul. Even zombies could speak. What else was impossible? However, Lin Wenwen only believed in the last one. That was, Lu Tianyu's soul had now become her sister Lin Xiao's. Otherwise, How could he explain why she, an outsider, needed to come all the way to save them and help them? Now they were using the excuse of cooperation to build a new base for them and let those high-level zombies protect them. Moreover, no one could have the same temperament, the same habits, and the same way of speaking as her sister. Lin Wenwen now only felt that her sister had returned. If it was only a vague suspicion before, then now, after hearing Du Yuanxing's words, she had confirmed it. Suddenly, Long Qingying looked at her strangely. Wenwen, why are you crying? Lin Wenwen came back to her senses and wiped her face, only to find that it was a little wet. It's nothing, I just thought of something. She wiped her face and said with a smile. Long Qingying looked at her suspiciously. Lin Wenwen's entire temperament seemed to calm down. She smiled softly and said, Why are you looking at me? I'm thinking if we should leave. I wonder if Sister Lu has finished watching the show. Long Qingying said, Where are we going? Lin Wenwen said, To our own territory. This is someone else's territory. I can't feel at ease staying here all day long. Long Qingying looked at her and nodded. She said, Then you should stay here and don't go anywhere else. Lin Wenwen looked at her and said, I don't plan to go anywhere else. Long Qingying nodded. That's good. On the other side, Lin Xiao, who was told by Lin Wenwen to go watch the show, was currently in a large conference hall in the inner district of the government building. The tables in the conference hall were arranged in a door shape, arranged in 3 layers, and the 3 positions were obviously occupied by 3 groups of people. In the middle was Wu Qingyue, and beside him were Xiao Yunlong, Meng Yu, Mo Li, Xiao Liqing, and other subordinates, all sitting behind him. On the left was Yang Chao, and beside him was another level 6 deputy leader. But there was one less person on his left, and the seat was empty. On the right was Zhou Shihui, who looked about the same age as Wu Qingyue. He was slightly older than him, and belonged to the middle of the 3 leaders. Wu Qingyue was the youngest, but his strength was the strongest. Behind him was a level 6 deputy leader, as well as the deputy leader Chen Yuding. Meng Yu, Mo Li, Xiao Liqing, and other level 5 ability users numbered more than 20. In terms of military strength, Yang Chao and Zhou Shihui were no match for him. In contrast, Yang Chao had 2 rank 6 metahumans, but the deceased Pu Croang was not a capable subordinate. Moreover, he had courted death himself. Now, Yang Chao only had 1 rank 6 metahuman as his subordinate. There were not many level 5 ability users, less than 10. On the other side of Zhou Shihui, there was an old man and a woman, 2 level 6 ability users. Needless to say, the woman was the goddess of this base, Yin Fangyu. The other level 6 arcanist was an old man with white hair and a wrinkled face. He wore a pair of thick reading glasses on the bridge of his nose. Lu Tianyi and Kong Qingming were sitting behind Zhou Shihui, and Kong Qingming was wearing a green military uniform. Lu Tianyi's uniform was not a military uniform, but a white researcher's robe. The leaders and deputy leaders here all wore black military uniforms, and only other ability users below level 5 wore green military uniforms or other professional uniforms. The people of the 3 parties, whether it was ability managers or technical personnel, were all sitting in the conference hall. They were all sitting in the conference hall. Most of them added up to 40 or 50 people. At this time, the atmosphere in the hall was somewhat depressing, except for a few big shots. The people behind just quietly bowed their heads, not daring to breathe too loudly. On the other hand, the people on Yang Chao's side all looked a little guilty and flustered. Chapter 356. Only Yang Chao sat there calmly with his arms crossed, as if nothing had happened to him. It was as if he had already made up his mind about something and didn't care about what others thought. Zhou Shihui was a man who wasn't handsome, but he wasn't ugly either. At first glance, there wasn't anything special about him, but after a few more glances, one would find that he was actually quite pleasing to the eye. Moreover, he had a calm and steady temperament, which was a temperament unique to mature men. His eyes were calm, but it was as if he could see through a lot of things. He looked at Yang Chao and then at Wu Qingyue. Everyone has received the news about last night's incident. So what do the two leaders have to say now? Zhou Shui had to ask calmly when he saw that the two leaders didn't say anything. Wu Qingyue smiled faintly and said, "Old Zhou, you speak. The information is in your hands." Zhou Shui looked at him, then glanced at the people in the conference hall. He deliberately looked at Yang Chao and saw that his expression didn't change. He nodded, picked up the information on the table in front of him, and began to speak. Okay then. First, the deputy leader Pu Zhitsong's death. According to the information, Pu Zhitsong died in a vendetta, and the other party was a zombie. 3 days ago, Pu Zhitsong sent people to kidnap a woman in the base and raped her. He also connived with his subordinate Luan Jian to rape the victim. The victim was Chun Yuding's legal wife, Shen Yuzhen, who was about to be promoted to deputy leader. When Leader Wu brought people to find Shen Yuzhen, she was already unconscious. She was also injected with zombie blood and was severely infected. This was the cause. Zhou Shui paused, then flipped through the information and continued. Then the second thing, at around 9 o'clock last night, Pu Zhitsong was attacked by zombies and rushed into the research lab after being infected. Then he had a dispute with the leader of the second zombie virus research team, Liang Dashu, and then there was an explosion. Before the explosion, Pu Zhitsong was already killed, and the second leader of the zombie research team, Liang Dashu, was killed by the bomb. According to the research assistant, Ms. M.O. Li, there was an unfamiliar level 6 or level 7 psychic who was about to kill them, so Liang Dashu took out a grenade and detonated it. After saying that, he looked at Wu Qingyue and said, "Leader Wu, bring your people here." Wu Qingyue nodded and glanced at Xiao Liqing behind him. Xiao Liqing immediately stood up and walked out of the conference hall. Everyone waited quietly. After 2 minutes, they saw Xiao Liqing come in with a group of people. A few of them were dragged in, because they were both missing a leg. These were the criminals that Wu Qingyue and Lin Xiao and the others had caught yesterday morning when they went to look for Shen Yuzhen. Xiao Liqing returned to his seat and said with a serious expression, "These are the criminals who were assaulting Shen Yuzhen when we found her." The prisoners had confessed that what they had done had been ordered by Pu Zhitsong. When we arrived, they had already injected the zombie virus into the victim's body. End of report. Wu Qingyue waited for him to finish before nodding to him. After Xiao Liqing finished speaking, everyone in the conference room looked at the prisoners kneeling in front of the conference table with sharp eyes. Zhou Shui looked at them indifferently and asked, "Is that so? What do you have to say?" None of the prisoners, however, had anything to say. They all hung their heads and said nothing. It seemed that they had given up and were desperate, so they knew that their fate would not change no matter what they said. Zhou Shui waited for them for a while and saw that they did not say anything. Then he continued, "This matter has been verified. What Director Xiao said has been confirmed to be the truth. The following 6 people, including Pu Zhitsong, Lin XX, and Huang XX, have violated the base's regulations on the protection of women. It has also been confirmed that Pu Zhitsong has also violated the base's regulations on the protection of women. Moreover, they injected the zombie virus into the victim, causing the victim's death. The situation is extremely bad. Now Pu Zhitsong, Lin XX, Huang XX, Chen XX, and the other 3 people are sentenced to death by the base's law. Execution method: execution by shooting. It will be carried out at noon today." After pronouncing the sentence, he glanced at everyone. He asked, "Is there any objection?" Everyone was silent, indicating that there was no objection. Zhou Shui continued, "Well, the verdict is passed. Take them away." "Yes." The soldier standing behind the criminals immediately took 2 steps forward and dragged away the rapists who were kneeling on the ground. Wu Qingyue still had a faint smile on his face, and the corners of his mouth were slightly raised. This was his usual expression, and no one could tell what he was thinking. However, Yang Chao's face sank. He could not speak at all. Originally, Pu Zhitsong's death was due to being bitten to death by a zombie. He had wanted to argue that this zombie might have been brought in by someone from the Hades base, and then pushed the blame onto Wu Qingyue. But now, Wu Qingyue not only had a witness, but also a criminal. Moreover, he had sealed the news so tightly that Yang Chao had not heard anything. Now he was completely caught off guard. Although Pu Zhitsong's matter had nothing to do with him, Pu Zhitsong was still his subordinate. He had already made a mistake of mismanaging his subordinates, so he could not say anything now. However, Yang Chao still asked the question. I want to ask, this Xin Yuzhen should have been found by Leader Wu in the end. So why did she turn into a zombie and attack Pu Zhitsong? Wu Qingyue put his hands on the conference table, his elbows on the table, and his 10 fingers clasped together under his chin. He looked at Yang Chao indifferently and said with the same smile, because we respected the wishes of the victim's husband, Qin Yuding, we handed Xin Yuzhen's body over to him to deal with. Is there a problem? Yang Chao said coldly, of course there is a problem. If you had directly burned Xin Yuzhen's body, then she would not have turned into a zombie and come into the base to attack Pu Zhitsong. Moreover, you can't even find her hiding place now. If this continues, how many more people will she attack? Who will bear the consequences now? Wu Qingyue smiled and said, who will bear the consequences? I'll tell you, of course, it will be Pu Zhitsong, because this is his crime. Moreover, the security of the base is your responsibility. If you can't catch the target, who will bear the consequences? Moreover, at noon yesterday, Qin Yuding had already taken Xin Yuzhen's body out of the base. Outside the base, there is no longer any relationship with the base, and the security risks have been eliminated. As for why she turned into a zombie and sneaked in that night, shouldn't that be your problem? After all, the security system of the entire base is managed by you. What he meant was, it's all your fault, your fault, your fault. No matter how you quibble, it's all your fault. So what does your fault have to do with me? Yang Chao's face turned a little green after hearing his words, and he was speechless. You! Chapter 357. Zhou Shihui said, well, if Xin Yuzhen was taken out of the base before she became a zombie, then this has nothing to do with Leader Wu. As the victim's lover, as long as she doesn't stay in the base and cause harm to others, Qin Yuding has the right to take her away. It was not that Zhou Shihui was speaking up for Wu Qingyue, but it was the truth. It could only be said that Wu Qingyue was on the side of reason, which was why Yang Chao questioned him. It wouldn't have any effect. Therefore, Yang Chao's words would only be a slap in the face. After thinking about it, Yang Chao said with a gloomy face, there's no problem with my guards. Someone must have sneaked in the zombies, and there's even a zombie beast. For the past 2 days, your people have been bringing outsiders in and out. I have the right to suspect that you're behind this. Wu Qingyue looked at him and asked, Chief Yang, you need to have evidence when you say that. Otherwise, it would be slander. I will find the evidence, and I will also catch that female zombie. Yang Chao snorted coldly. Zhou Shihui looked at the two of them. Seeing that Yang Chao had temporarily calmed down, he continued, now let's talk about the second matter. After Pu Luotsong was bitten by zombies, he ran to the research institute. Their purpose was still to be found out. However, he got into an argument with 2 researchers, Liang Dashu and Mo Li, and the lab exploded. Now, may one of the victims, Mo Li, come forward and explain the situation? Wu Qingyue turned back and nodded at Mo Li. Mo Li stood up and walked out. She walked to the empty space in front of the conference table. There was a chair in the middle. Mo Li walked over and sat down, then straightened her back, looked straight ahead, and said expressionlessly, at 9:40 last night, Dr. Liang and I were still working in the underground research room of the Research Institute. Suddenly, Pu Zhitsong's face turned pale, and he rushed in with a crazed look on his face. Dr. Liang and I didn't know what was going on, so we didn't guard against him. In the end, he took the chance to kidnap me and threatened Dr. Liang to hand over the antidote to the zombie virus. But so far, we haven't developed an antidote to the virus, so we can't respond to Pu Krok's forceful request. She paused for a moment before continuing, but when he was agitated and not paying attention, I used physical combat skills to shake him off and escape from his control. At this moment, an unfamiliar metal ability user suddenly appeared and quickly killed Pu Xuetsong, who was suffering from the zombie virus outbreak. When he was about to take action against me and Dr. Liang detonated the bomb to protect me and the important research materials. Then he died in the explosion. Mo Li's expression and tone were calm, but her eyes were moist. But she blinked hard and quickly controlled herself. That was the situation during the explosion last night. Zhou Shui looked down at the information in his hand and asked, "Do you know what level this metal ability user is?" Mo Li said, "My psychic ability is at the mid-stage of the 5th rank, so it won't work on an ability user above the 6th rank. Last night, I used my ability to test the other party and found out that he had no reaction to my ability at all. So my preliminary conclusion is that the other party is a peak late-stage 6th rank or a level 7 ability user." Speaking of this, except for Wu Qingyue and the others who already knew the situation in advance, and Yang Chao who had a guilty conscience, everyone else's expression changed. Especially Zhou Shihui's expression was slightly stunned. Then he looked up at Mo Li's eyes. "You mean the other party is a peak 6th rank near the 7th rank, or a level 7 ability user?" This matter was a bit big. Yang Chao pointed at the corpse and said, "You may not be able to recognize this victim who has lost more than half of her head, but I think there are many people who know her. She is my sister, Yang Yin. Last night, at around 9 o'clock, she suddenly disappeared for a few minutes, and when she was found, she was already like this." After hearing Yang Chao's words, everyone's expression immediately changed again. This time, it became a little strange. Some even rejoiced in their hearts. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.